Jon Snow had always felt that the weight of the North, that bleak and beautiful landscape, rested heavy upon his shoulders even before he understood the looming darkness beyond the wall. Born in the shadow of secrets he couldn't yet grasp, he had walked a lonely road, labeled a bastard at every corner. In the chill hush of Castle Black and the harsh glare of Winterfell's courtyard, he had always been searching for his place in this world. Deep in his bones, there had always been a sense that he was not where he was meant to be, that some grand purpose called him. But it was quiet, a faint echo of possibility, easily drowned by the ceaseless wind and the complicated truths of his heritage. This was how the Red Priestess Melisandre first looked upon him, her eyes gleaning something of a riddle in him, though for a time even she could not place precisely how events would unfold. He was born, if half the stories were to be believed, amid wars and alliances, a child of ice and fire, though that knowledge was locked away in swirling rumor. When he was old enough to grasp a sword and feel the sharp tang of winter on his tongue, it was too easy to believe all those rumors meant nothing. The North was full of whispers echoing from the crags and mountains. Perhaps he was a product of Eddard Stark's moment of weakness, perhaps he was something else altogether. Even in the first days of his youth, untested and uncertain, Jon Snow had that unwavering moral center that made him stand out among the squires and stable boys of Winterfell. He was quiet, yes, reserved, but capable of empathy in ways that often astonished those around him. He joined the Night's Watch in pursuit of a place to belong, trusting that at the wall he would find purpose. There he discovered a ragtag band of men from 1,000 backgrounds, some criminals, others broken nobles, and still more harboring secrets. He forged a brotherhood with them, especially Samwell Tarly, Gren, PYP, and the Old Bear Lord Commander Mormont. Yet the same sense of displacement gnawed at him. Even after reciting the vows that told him he was the shield that guarded the realms of men, it was as if something delayed him from fulfilling the deeper truth that he was meant for more than defense, more than a lonely life of black cloth and sleepless nights. Melisandre saw it in him, that glimmer of prophecy. She had once staked her conviction on Stannis Baratheon, believing the stern and desperate man to be Azor Ahai reborn. But the flames whispered otherwise when her illusions about Stannis's fate crumbled in the snowdrifts outside Winterfell. She returned to the wall haunted by her own uncertainty, seeing glimpses of Jon Snow in her nightly fires, always overshadowed by a faint flicker of something else. On the ramparts, with the wind howling and the clang of the Night's Watch forging new swords below, she lingered near him, her red garments swaying with each gust. Jon had regarded her with suspicion, for the warmth of Lawler, the Lord of Light, felt too alien in the freezing gloom of the far north. But day by day, her eyes would rest upon him, and a subtle tension brewed in her expression. It was as though she saw him standing at a crossroads. She believed, in time, he might represent not only the North's salvation but all of Westeros's. When he journeyed beyond the wall with his brothers, discovering the wildlings, befriending them, and even falling for Ygritte, he learned quickly how complicated it was to dwell in a world where honor and duty might come into direct conflict with love and loyalty. He discovered how fragile life was when measured against the brutal reality of the undead White Walkers. He saw children turned into whites, entire villages emptied, and the flicker of Ygritte's final moments as she died in his arms. Each of these experiences molded him. They carved out old illusions and replaced them with a tempered determination. At Craster's Keep, in the haunted night, he fought those who betrayed the Watch. Time and again he tested his steel. He was a blade in the darkness, a ward against the terrors that few Southerners believed in. But in his heart Jon craved a resolution that he could not yet name. A part of him felt as though he was on the brink of revelation, yet it never came. Instead, he encountered betrayal from his own brothers. Leadership fell upon him unexpectedly, with the responsibilities of being Lord Commander thrust upon his shoulders. He sought to unify the wildlings and the Night's Watch in one cause, survival against the others. But the old ways clashed with the new. Distrust festered among the Black brothers. Eventually, knives found their way into Jon's body, each one an echo of a delayed fate, each one a betrayal that severed him from the life he thought he was meant to lead. The memory of that night still lingered like a shadow across his soul, Ollie's trembling hand, Aliso Thorne's grim visage, and the hiss of steel sliding into flesh. Blood spattered on the cold stones, and the night air swallowed his final breath. His last thought was not of being a bastard, nor a brother of the Night's Watch. It was a fleeting image of his siblings Arya, Bran, Sansa, each scattered to corners of the realm, and one final pang of regret that he could no longer protect them. Then came the darkness, deeper than any winter's night. The Red Woman was not ready to see him lost. Somewhere in the gray halls of death, Jon Snow lingered, drifting on the edge of oblivion. She called upon the Lord of Light with trembling incantations, her voice raw with desperation. She washed his wounds, clipped locks of his hair, whispered words of fire, and let the candles burn low. Ghost, Jon's dire wolf, stood vigil, baring his fangs at any who might disturb the ritual. Melisandre summoned something from the other side. For the first few minutes there was only silence, a dreadful hush that caused Tormund to spit curses at the floor and Davos to grind his teeth. Then Jon gasped back to life. It was not a clean return, it was a resurrection marred by confusion and heartbreak. Jon awoke bewildered, with eyes wide, his skin clammy and hair matted to his brow. He scrambled into a sitting position, drawing in lungfuls of air as though he had been trapped underwater. Tormund cursed again, shock and relief warring on his face. Davos, stoic, stepped forward, placed a supportive hand on Jon's shoulder. Melisandre simply stared, the torchlight reflecting in her red eyes. In that moment, she felt the near certainty that she had just brought back the one the prophecies spoke of, the prince who was promised, Azor Ahai reborn. Jon himself had no notion of such a grand destiny. He struggled with the memory of betrayal, the sense of failure, the sudden cold reality that he had died. Stripping off his black cloak that once symbolized his vows, he declared that his watch had ended, for how could a dead man remain bound to any oath? And yet, he could not abandon the cause. A new sense of purpose churned within him. It felt as if he had been forced to walk the most painful path possible just to reach a new beginning. He had to warn the realms of men. The Night's King and his legions of wights loomed closer with every passing day. With Ser Davos, Tormund, and a handful of loyal black brothers, Jon rode south. He did not do so to seek glory or to claim land or title, but to rally all living souls against the army of the dead. He traveled to the ancestral seat of the Starks, retaking Winterfell with Sansa at his side. The bastard of Bolton was defeated, though not without great loss. In the crypts beneath Winterfell, by the statues of long-dead Stark kings, Jon wondered if his father, Eddard Stark, would have been proud of the choices he'd made. The flickering torchlight revealed the unyielding stone faces, carved with sullen expressions. Jon felt unmoored. He did not have Ned's bones to bury, nor the surety of his father's words to guide him. All he had was a swirl of new responsibilities. As the new Lord of Winterfell in all but name, he prepared for a war unlike any the North had seen in centuries. Meanwhile, in the secrets of her own chambers, Melisandre bent over every text and scroll, searching for confirmations of her recurring vision. Azor Ahai was said to have forged a sword in sacred fire, tempered first in water, then in the heart of a lion, and finally in the heart of the one he loved most. For years, she had interpreted it in ways that supported one king or another, but these illusions had shattered like cheap glass. Now, she felt that everything pointed to Jon Snow reborn amid salt and smoke, his own soul tempered by heartbreak and betrayal. Her eyes traced lines in the fire, and a shape formed. A direwolf, a sword of flame, and a man standing at the head of an army facing a horde of icy wraiths. All the flickers of the prophecy indicated Jon. Yet Melisandre saw something else, a delay, a pause in the cycle, as if fate had stuttered. Some cosmic hesitation had kept the sword Lightbringer from flaring to life. Jon had died and come back, but his full potential had not ignited. She wondered if that meant Jon was not the prince who was promised after all, that perhaps her revival of him had somehow disrupted the natural order. Or was it that the final forging of Lightbringer, the prophesied flaming sword, required some sacrifice so tragic and immense that neither Jon nor anyone around him had the courage to carry it out? There were no definitive answers, only the hush of the winter wind outside Winterfell's great hall. Jon did not dwell on prophecy. He marshaled the North, forging alliances with House Mormont, House Glover, House Serwyn, and all the others who would listen. His manner was earnest, and there was something in his eyes that bespoke both suffering and unrelenting resolve. Many good Northerners rallied to him because he was Ned Stark's son, or so they believed, or because they simply saw his unwavering honesty. Sansa, cunning and politically astute after her travails, guided him through the labyrinth of competing interests, shaping him into a capable leader. The North crowned him king in the North, echoing Robb Stark's ascension, but Jon wore the crown like a man burdened. He had not asked for it. He scarcely felt worthy of it. Yet perhaps it was part of destiny's slow unveiling. To secure more allies against the Great War, Jon traveled to Dragonstone to treat with Daenerys Targaryen, the fiery queen with dragons at her command. The first meeting was fraught with tension, an exiled Targaryen queen demanding fealty, a resurrected Stark bastard turned king in the North reluctant to bend the knee. Daenerys's dragons screamed overhead, unsettling even the staunchest men of Jon's retinue. But Jon impressed her with his sincerity, his stark honesty, and his unwavering focus on the threat from the Night's King. Over time, a mutual respect formed between them. They faced undead whites together in a daring expedition beyond the wall, forging an uneasy alliance sealed by the loss of one of her dragons to the enemy. The ramifications were enormous. Now the Night's King possessed a white dragon. That heartbreak rattled Daenerys. She had believed herself invincible with her 3 dragons, but to see one turned into an instrument of ice and death shook her confidence to the core. In the aftermath, she began to trust Jon more deeply, for she saw a reflection of her own struggle in him. Both had borne unimaginable burdens. Their closeness blossomed, leading to shared glances in fire-lit corridors, hushed confessions, and eventually a bond deeper than mere political alliance. The Northmen whispered about it, uncertain how to feel about a Targaryen lying with their king. Meanwhile, Tyrion Lannister, Daenerys' loyal hand, worried that their budding romance might complicate the precarious coalition. None of them recognized the echoes of prophecy. When ice meets fire, the old texts had said, a new dawn arises. Yet that dawn was slow to break. Melisandre lingered on the periphery, not quite banished but certainly not beloved in Winterfell or Dragonstone. She watched Jon and Daenerys with a careful eye, wondering if the final forging of Lightbringer might require Daenerys to be that critical sacrifice, the one Azor Ahai loved most. But she dreaded that possibility. She had grown wary of the Lord of Light's demands. She had already erred in sacrificing Shireen Baratheon, a mistake that haunted her dreams. Now she walked with caution, observing each sign, hoping fate would not demand that same blood-soaked path. When the Night King finally led his army against the living at the Battle of Winterfell, the horrors of the Long Night came crashing down upon them. Legions of whites, ancient monstrosities, and the dread visage of an undead dragon unleashed a tempest of ice and fury. Jon fought valiantly from the walls, sword in hand, directing waves of defenders who held the line for as long as humanly possible. Daenerys soared overhead with her 2 living dragons, unleashing torrents of flame that lit the sky in brilliant arcs. The living seemed to hold on by a thread, battered by wave after wave of the undead. The White Walkers themselves advanced on foot, their crystalline blue eyes scanning the chaos with eerie detachment. Jon confronted one of them directly in the courtyard, their blades clashing in bursts of eerie blue sparks. His Valyrian steel sword, Longclaw, was one of the few weapons capable of withstanding a White Walker's unnatural chill. He drove the creature back, summoning all his strength, but behind it loomed thousands more. He spared a glance skyward, seeing Daenerys and her dragons locked in a brutal dogfight with the white dragon spewing frost flame. The night sky shimmered with fire and ice, an apocalyptic dance that threatened to consume everything. Despite the horrors, there was no grand unveiling of Azor Ahai's flaming sword that night. Jon hacked and slashed, shouting commands, rescuing friends from encroaching death, but the radiant, definitive sign of the prince who was promised did not appear. At one point, as the dead threatened to overrun the gates, Jon felt the stirrings of a deep, primordial power well within him, as though something in his blood called to the half-frozen ground. But it flickered and vanished, overshadowed by the wails of the dying and the frantic pace of battle. In the end, it was a collective effort: Arya's cunning, Bran's luring presence as the three-eyed raven, Daenerys' dragons, and every sword in the north that shattered the Night King. Arya dealt the final blow, a stroke of unexpected agility that ended the army of the dead in one stroke of Valyrian steel. With the threat gone, winter lingered but began to recede. The living emerged from the shattered fortress of Winterfell battered but triumphant. They celebrated survival, mourning the thousands lost. Jon, for all his bravery, questioned why fate had cast him in this role if, at the final moment, he was not the one to deliver the blow. He felt relief that the tide of darkness was stemmed, but also a confusion that rattled him. All those whispered prophecies about Azor Ahai, the glint in Melisandre's eyes, the sacrifices he had endured, yet it was Arya Stark, his little sister, who had ended the threat of eternal night. So, if he was indeed Azor Ahai, why had destiny hesitated at the precipice? Melisandre departed Winterfell soon after, her faith shaken but not wholly destroyed. She believed that perhaps the prophecy was misread, that Arya had been the dagger in the dark that fate needed. The Red Woman walked into the snow, discarding her choker of glamour, letting the centuries catch up to her body, and vanished into dust at sunrise. In doing so, she took her unanswered questions with her. But Jon lived on, weighted with a sense of emptiness and an ache that refused to dissipate. If the long night was truly over, what was left for him? He had died and come back, only to remain overshadowed by other destinies. He tried to bury himself in rebuilding Winterfell, forging alliances with the surviving lords. On the horizon, political turmoil threatened from the Iron Throne. Daenerys, fueled by ambition and heartbreak, pressed her claim on King's Landing, and Jon found himself torn between love and trepidation. He wanted to believe in the queen he had grown close to, the woman who had fought so bravely at his side. But he had also seen a streak of ruthlessness in her, a willingness to purge entire cities by dragonfire if they stood in her way. Thus, the next war began. Daenerys marched south, with Jon's forces hesitantly trailing behind, seeking to unify the Seven Kingdoms under a just rule, or so they believed. Cersei Lannister refused to yield King's Landing, and conflict ignited, culminating in Daenerys' horrific decision to raze much of the city even after the bells of surrender tolled. Jon stood in the streets surrounded by carnage, hearing the screams of children, the roar of Drogon overhead. His heart pounded with helpless anger, sorrow, and betrayal. Had the living endured the long night only to bring about a new era of tyranny and destruction? In the throne room, still smoldering from dragonfire, Daenerys stood triumphant, dark hair wild around her face, eyes alight with a fierce glow. The iron throne behind her stood partially melted in the heat. Jon approached, torn apart by what he had witnessed. She spoke of liberation, of forging a new world free of tyrants, but the city burned under her feet. He saw thousands of innocents lying in the rubble. The Targaryen madness, that old rumor whispered through the centuries, now revealed itself to him, and it chilled him more than any wind beyond the wall ever had. Still, he loved her. He remembered the nights they spent whispering hopes and fears to one another, the tenderness in her touch. He pleaded with her to show mercy, to approach the future with compassion. But Daenerys was too consumed by her vision. She saw herself as an avenging angel, bringing justice with fire. For a moment, in the hush of that broken throne room, Jon considered what would happen if he stepped aside, allowing her to rule in the only way she knew how, with fear and flame. But the memory of his father, Ned Stark, flickered through his mind, his unwavering honor. Then the whisper of prophecy surfaced again. Azor Ahai had forged Lightbringer by plunging steel into the heart of the one he loved. Jon recalled Melisandre's trembling voice repeating that prophecy on bitterly cold nights. He remembered her caution that forging Lightbringer demanded the greatest sacrifice. In a sense, that prophecy had always lingered in the corner of his mind, and though he had never wanted to believe he was Azor Ahai, nor act on such a monstrous interpretation, he saw the horrifying logic of it now. If Daenerys was lost to the thirst for power, if she threatened to unleash terror upon the remaining cities of Westeros, perhaps the only way to save the realm was to stop her. She was the one he loved. He felt it in every corner of his soul. Yet that love now led to the bleakest choice of his life. He held her close in the ruins of the throne room, kissing her one last time, tears lining his eyes. Then he slid his dagger into her heart. She gasped, eyes wide with shock and sorrow. The last breath of a queen lingered in the air. Drogon roared in morning rage, melting the remnants of the Iron Throne, taking Daenerys' body away. And Jon remained there on his knees, trembling, too numb to process what he had done. He was exiled soon after, condemned to the Night's Watch once more by the new king, Bran the Broken, a compromise to appease both the Unsullied and lords of the realm. In truth, Jon accepted his fate. The weight of the deed demanded solitude. He returned north, passing the remnants of Castle Black. He set foot again in the trackless forest beyond the wall, accompanied only by Ghost and a few wildlings who viewed him as a friend. The long winter had started to recede and the winds felt less hostile. Birds sang in the thin morning light as if heralding a new chapter. Yet even beyond the wall, far from the disputes of Westeros, he felt no peace. Each time he closed his eyes, he recalled Daenerys' final breath, her dark eyes, the warmth of her body giving way to death in his arms. He couldn't reconcile the heartbreak. Had that been the forging of Lightbringer? The prophecies said the sword would burn with holy fire. And yet Longclaw remained as it always was, Valyrian steel, forging no flame of any kind. There was no brilliant conflagration marking him as a prophesied hero. Just the quiet hush of remorse. So had fate delayed once more? Was it that the forging of Lightbringer required some deeper spiritual trial that he had not yet undergone? Had the prophecy been wrong all along? These questions stalked his dreams as the months turned to years. In his silent wanderings among the free folk, he made a life of building shelters for the wildlings, hunting for them, forging a fragile peace with the land. Ghost trotted at his side, a constant companion in the northern wilderness. More and more, Jon found himself reflecting on the nature of prophecy. Maybe Azor Ahai was not merely a single man swinging a flaming sword. Maybe the long night had been ended through a collective effort and the role of each person was part of a grand tapestry. But that did nothing to alleviate the sense that something in him remained incomplete. One cold evening, as the sun dipped below icy mountains, John saw a strange glow in the sky. It was not the red of sunset nor the green shimmer of an aurora. It was something else entirely, a pale silver flame dancing across the horizon. Ghost whined at his feet, unsettled. John felt an instinctive pull, a faint prickle along his arms. Grabbing his fur cloak, he ventured toward the light, trekking through waist-deep snow. The wildlings who saw him offered hushed prayers, concerned but trusting in John's instincts. He had always been something of an omen to them, a man who came back from death. He followed the glimmering phenomenon for hours, stumbling through deep drifts, forging a path by moonlight. Then, atop a rise, he gazed down into a hidden valley blanketed by snow. At its center was a fissure in the ground from which a gentle glow emanated. It felt warm, inexplicably so, despite the freezing air. John approached, sword gripped at his side. In that crevice, he found a hidden hot spring or a volcanic vent, steam rising and meeting the frigid air. The steam glowed from within as if lit by an otherworldly flame. Carefully, John knelt and peered down into the fissure. The heat wafted over him, bringing the memory of summer. Then he heard a voice. Or perhaps it was not a voice but a pulse, an echo of something ancient. It reverberated in his chest, calling to him. Tentatively, he reached forward, letting the warmth touch his hands. The vapor condensed on his skin, steam swirling around him, curling around Longclaw's blade. For a fleeting moment, he thought he heard a woman's voice. Maybe it was Ygritte, maybe Daenerys, maybe the Lady Lyanna who had died long ago. The words were indistinct, full of sorrow and longing, urging him onward. Without a second thought, John slid himself into the crevice, descending carefully on the slick stones. Sweat beaded on his brow. The deeper he went, the warmer it got. The silvery glow pulsed, luring him deeper into the earth. Finally, he reached a small subterranean chamber, lit by an unearthly brightness from veins of some unknown crystal embedded in the rock. The water pooled at the center, unbelievably hot. John dipped a hand in and felt it burn, yet not unbearably. It reminded him of the times he had ventured into the hot springs beneath Winterfell, known for their unusual warmth in the dead of winter. But this was different, tinged with something mystical. He stood there, heart hammering in his chest, as the voice in his mind whispered again, fragments of prophecy, the hiss of steel, a woman's cry, glimpses of fire and ice swirling together. Then, compelled by an instinct he didn't fully understand, John drew Longclaw. The Valyrian steel glinted in the unnatural light, revealing the faint swirl of the rippled metal. He looked at the pommel where the direwolf's head was carved in pale stone, a final remembrance of House Mormont's gift to him and the heritage he had carried all these years. He steadied his breath and slowly lowered the blade into the pool. Instantly, the waters hissed as though in protest. Steam erupted in an angry cloud, and John almost dropped the sword. The chamber filled with a searing glow, and in that scorching brilliance, he felt his soul quake. Images flickered before him, a woman with silver-gold hair smiling at him beneath the starlit sky, Ygritte's teasing grin in an icy cave, Arya's bright eyes, Bran's haunted gaze, Sansa's hopeful smile, Sam's unwavering friendship, Eddard Stark's solemn face, and even Melisandre's entreating stare. All the love, pain, betrayal, and heartbreak of his life hammered into his consciousness. He let out a choked cry, uncertain whether this was real or a waking dream. Then the water settled. The glow dimmed. Carefully, he lifted Longclaw from the pool. At first, nothing seemed changed. The blade was still dark metal, shining with condensation yet not alight with flame. John's heart sank a little, for he had hoped something definitive would occur, that fate would offer a sign. Still, as he turned to leave, he caught a subtle flicker along the edge of the sword. Then, in a slow, steady surge, the steel took on a dim glow as if it were kindled from within. It was not the roaring flame he had once imagined a Lightbringer would bear. Rather, it was a ghostly brilliance, like the remnants of moonlight on water. The warmth in the air intensified, and John found his hand trembling, though he did not burn. The sword glimmered with an ethereal radiance, revealing that something had indeed changed. He felt a wave of emotion crash over him, relief, fear, awe, and a spark of defiance. He remembered the legends that said Azor Ahai's sword was radiant with living fire. But John had spent too long in the cold, in the realm of ice, to carry a simple flame. Perhaps his sword was a union of ice and fire, a tempered brilliance that was neither purely scorching nor purely cold. This was something new. A second chance. A second forging, delayed until he had come to terms with the greatest heartbreak of his life. But what purpose did this newly kindled sword serve? The White Walkers were vanquished, the long night dispelled by Arya Stark. Daenerys was gone and the realm was stumbling toward an uneasy peace under King Bran. Yet Jon sensed that the fight for the soul of Westeros was never truly over. Men's hearts remained flawed, capable of cruelty and avarice. The Northmen, the Southerners, the Ironborn each had their own ambitions. Another war might arise in a generation or less. If the realm required a champion to safeguard its future, he might still be needed. So perhaps the delay in his destiny was that the final forging of Lightbringer was not meant to simply defeat the others but to stand as a beacon for all times, ensuring that darkness, whether from ice or from men's blackened hearts, would not seize the realm again. Jon climbed out of the chamber, returning to the surface. He shielded his eyes against the morning sun and was greeted by Ghost's gentle whine. The direwolf sniffed curiously at Longclaw as if sensing the subtle shift. Jon patted Ghost's fur and said nothing, the sword's faint glow hidden in the daylight. He felt that he had crossed a threshold, stepped irrevocably into a new existence. In the days that followed, rumors spread among the wildlings about Jon's sword. Some claimed they saw it shine at night when the moon was high, a pale flame along the edges. Others said they felt warmth emanating from it. But Jon avoided questions, deflecting them as best he could. He was not eager to rekindle talk of prophecy, not after the heartbreak it had led him to. Yet the whispers persisted and some insisted that he was touched by both ice and fire. The quiet stirring in Jon's heart told him they were right, too much had transpired to deny the strange weave of his lineage. Rhaegar Targaryen's blood mingled with Lyanna Stark's, creating a child of two worlds. And now, even if no grand war loomed on the horizon, destiny had not abandoned him. The peace in the north was fragile. With King Bran enthroned far in the south, the wildlings and the few remaining members of the Night's Watch were left to their own devices beyond the wall. Settlements sprang up here and there. Tormund Giantsbane played the role of a boisterous leader, holding feasts and forging new communities from the chaos left by the White Walkers. Jon found himself taking on the tasks of a mediator, wandering from hamlet to hamlet, helping folks find lost livestock or settle disputes. At times, it seemed mundane compared to slaying whites or rallying armies, but in these small acts of unity, Jon discovered a quiet fulfillment. Yet the new Lightbringer's faint glow was not limited to the physical. Jon felt something shift within him, a deeper empathy for the suffering of others, a sharper instinct toward justice. It was as though the sword's forging had kindled a spark in his soul, giving him an almost preternatural sense of right and wrong. He became a pillar of stability for the wildlings, so much that Tormund jokingly referred to him as our radiant king beyond the wall. Jon would roll his eyes at that, but laughter did flow a bit easier these days, even though the undercurrent of pain never fully dissipated. Meanwhile, King Bran's vision turned north. The kingdom was tenuous, and while the immediate threat of the White Walkers was gone, new challenges arose: Ironborn rebellions, Dornish dissatisfaction, and the re-emergence of old grudges. In his wisdom, Bran recognized that Jon still had a part to play, so he requested a conference at the northern edge of the Gift, near the site of the old Night Fort. Ravens arrived bearing the king's message, urging Jon to come and share counsel. With a measure of reluctance, Jon left behind the Valley of Hot Springs and joined Tormund and a small escort of free folk. They traveled across the tundra, the cold wind biting at their faces. Jon recalled the last time he had been at the Night Fort. He was a young brother of the Watch, full of fear and curiosity about its haunted halls. Now he approached not as a boy, but as a man who had died once and sacrificed everything he loved to save the realm. The cursed fortress still loomed dark and foreboding, its ancient stones telling stories of nightmares and hidden passages. Bran awaited them within the courtyard, surrounded by a retinue of lords and knights. Sansa stood at his side, looking ever the regal lady of Winterfell. Arya was absent, off traveling the unknown seas. It warmed Jon's heart to see Sansa again, though the lines on her face showed the burden of leadership. He noticed how she and Bran exchanged significant looks when he approached, as if they both sensed the subtle shift in him. Perhaps his half-sibling and cousin, the three-eyed raven, perceived the glimmer in Jon's soul. Quietly, they convened around a long table set beneath a hastily erected pavilion. Bran explained that cracks were forming in the realm's unity and local lords were vying for more autonomy in the north. The Greyjoys were stirring up trouble on the seas, and the Lannister name had not vanished but lingered in certain pockets of the Westerlands. Sansa noted that many houses still questioned Bran's legitimacy as king, even if they respected his Stark heritage. That doubt sowed the seeds of discord. They all agreed that a demonstration of unity and strength was needed, some gesture to show that the North would stand with the crown, that old enmities would not tear them apart. "Why call upon me?" Jon asked, keeping his eyes lowered. "I broke my vows once I killed Daenerys. I surrendered the crown in the North. I have no ambition to rule. Sansa sighed. We know, Jon. But your name still carries weight. You were seen by many as the hero who united the Free Folk and the Night's Watch, the man who faced the others. They might even view you as a figure from legend. She gave him a measured look, one brimming with sympathy. We aren't here to thrust a crown upon you, but we need you. Jon turned to Bran, who stared at him with those distant, all-seeing eyes. Brother, I have no taste for politics. My place is beyond the wall. Bran nodded slowly. Fate has not finished with you, Jon. You carry something that might yet save the realm from its own darkness. Jon stiffened, aware that Bran referred to the newly forged Lightbringer. It was hidden beneath his cloak, strapped to his belt. He had not drawn it before the assembled lords. He felt protective of its secret, as if revealing it might bring new turmoil or misguided reverence. I can try to negotiate if you wish, Jon conceded, looking at Sansa. Help with disputes. But I am no Grand Knight or Lord. Sansa's lips curved into a gentle smile. That's exactly why they'll trust you. You never wanted power, and that is precisely what may make you the best mediator among these fractious houses. So it was that Jon Snow found himself drawn back into the realm's politics, though this time not as a would-be king or as a subordinate to another's ambition. He stood as a singular presence, a living legend, a man touched by the magic of ice and fire, a man who still carried the heavy memory of what ambition had done to Daenerys Targaryen and King's Landing. He would be the realm's conscience, reminding them that the greatest threats to humanity often arose not just from outside terrors but from within their own hearts. Over the ensuing weeks, Jon journeyed across the north, meeting with minor lords who refused to pay tribute to King Bran's treasury. Some bristled at any mention of the crown, remembering how the Targaryens had conquered the north with dragonfire centuries ago. Others demanded recompense for the devastation the Boltons had wrought or for the property destroyed by Daenerys's armies. Bitterness festered in every corner. At each meeting, Jon spoke plainly, reminding them of their shared sacrifices against the dead. We stood together, or we would have fallen, he would say, and if we forget that, we invite disaster upon ourselves. Sansa assisted, wielding her diplomatic skill and knowledge of each house's intricate feuds. Gradually, they chipped away at resentments, forging new treaties. Jon refused gifts of gold or titles, reinforcing the message that his sole purpose was to safeguard unity. By the flickering torchlight of many a great hall, he recounted the horrors he had seen, the white surging against Winterfell's walls and the black despair that threatened to engulf them all. In the face of such darkness, we must ensure we do not create our own, he would say, his voice grave. Something about his sincerity and the lines of sorrow on his face resonated with the hardened northerners. However, lurking beneath these alliances was a deeper unrest. Far to the south, rumors arrived that the Iron Islands had launched raids on the western coasts. In the Riverlands, a rogue band of mercenaries terrorized small folk, claiming loyalty to a lost Targaryen pretender. Some folks whispered that a red comet had been sighted again, bleeding across the sky. Unease settled upon the kingdom as if foreshadowing yet another reckoning. Late one evening, Jon walked along the parapets of Winterfell where he and Sansa had regrouped after another successful negotiation. Snow drifted softly, dusting the stone. He paused by the very spot where he had once gazed southward, dreaming of something more than being a bastard. He thought of Daenerys. He thought of Ygritte. Each had shaped him in ways he could never fully express, forging him into the man he was now. The flicker of the newly forged Lightbringer glinted at his side, barely perceptible. He rested his hands on the parapet, exhaling a trembling breath. Would he always be haunted by the memory of that throne room, by the necessity of the act that ended Daenerys's life? He knew in his heart that if he had not stopped her, she might have gone on to burn half the realm in her quest for liberation. Yet the guilt clung to him. He looked up at the dark sky, wishing for answers, but the heavens remained silent. Then Sansa approached, her furs whispering softly against the stone. She stood beside him. For a long moment, they watched the snow fall in companionable silence. Eventually she said, "I see how it torments you, Jon. Even after all this time." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak at first. When he found his voice, it was hushed. "I took a life that I cherished. And for that, no victory is sweet." She placed a hand on his arm. "I wish there had been another way," she said gently. "But we all know what could have happened if she hadn't been stopped. Still, I'm sorry that fate demanded so much from you." Jon swallowed hard. Melisandre once spoke of Azor Ahai forging Lightbringer by killing his beloved Nissa. I always thought it was a gruesome tale, perhaps half legend. But I wonder if that moment in the throne room was the real forging of a new Lightbringer. He gestured to Longclaw. "It changed Sansa. I don't show it to many people, but it radiates an odd glow in the dark now. Sometimes it warms my hand. Her eyes widened with surprise and a hint of awe. She had grown used to the notion that John was touched by a destiny beyond their understanding, but seeing confirmation of it was something else entirely. "What does it mean?" she asked softly. He gave a small, sorrowful shrug. "That I must carry the burden of that story. But also that perhaps I have a duty to the realm. Not just to sit on a throne or wage war, but to guide, to heal, to ensure the darkness never rises again from our own hatred." He faced her. "Maybe that's the delay in my destiny. The prophecy spoke of a great champion, but never said the final forging of Lightbringer had to be used solely against the White Walkers. The dead are defeated, but evil can be born in men's hearts just as easily." Sansa nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "You might be right, John. Power corrupts easily. If you, as Azor Ahai or whatever name we give it, can stand as a beacon of conscience, perhaps that's what the realm needs most." John gave a wry laugh. "If that's the case, the realm's in dire need. I'm just a man, riddled with regrets, unsure of what path to take." She smiled, a soft glimmer in her eyes. "That's precisely why you might be the one best suited. You've seen what unchecked ambition and violence can do. You've lived through betrayal and heartbreak. You don't seek power. And you already gave your life once for the realm. Who better to guide us?" John made no reply, but something in her words settled into his heart. The scars of his past would never vanish, but perhaps they could serve as a cautionary tale, fueling him to lead with compassion. In the weeks that followed, John quietly tested the sword's new properties. Each night, away from prying eyes, he found a patch of darkness where the moonlight was faint and he drew Longclaw. Its edges shimmered with a luminescent sheen, pale as a ghost flame. The air around the blade carried a subtle warmth, nothing fierce like Ar. Oaring fire, but comforting, as though the friction of ice and fire had birthed a gentle, sustaining heat. When he held the sword, he felt a faint vibration in his arm, like the far-off echo of a dragon's roar or the hush of winter wind. It was no ordinary weapon. Indeed, in the quiet of those nights, John began to sense that it was less about raw destructive power and more about reflection, an outward sign of the transformation in his own soul. He had always been the man who strove to protect, to serve. Now that desire was amplified, sharpened into a blade that could cut through the illusions that haunted men's minds. If he was to accept the mantle of Azor Ahai reborn, then his war was not solely with icy undead armies, but with the illusions of power and tyranny that destroyed nations from within. A test came sooner than expected. Factions in the north threatened open rebellion against King Bran, inspired by rumors that the crown planned to tax them heavily to rebuild King's Landing. The lords in question had grown weary of southern rulership, once again brandishing their right to self-govern. Torn between loyalty to her family and the political reality, Sansa tried negotiation, but tensions escalated and blood was spilled when hot-headed youths decided to press their advantage against a royal retinue. John and a small band of loyal free folk intervened, arriving at a remote mountain fort where the rebels had barricaded themselves. Darkness fell as they prepared for a parley. Snow flurries danced in the torchlit courtyard and tension crackled in the cold air. The rebel leader, a tall lord with a battered shield bearing a faded sigil of a rearing bear, some distant cousin of the Mormonts, stood upon the battlements. He bellowed his demands, an end to the increased taxes and an acknowledgement of an independent north. John stepped forward, hood pulled low, his cloak whipping in the wind. "We all fought together against the Night King," he shouted back. "Why tear each other apart now?" The lord sneered. "Because your so-called King Bran sits in the south, dividing the spoils. Winterfell belongs to the Starks. That's true enough. But the rest of us will not be ruled by a cripple who sees everything but knows nothing of the North's suffering." Hot anger flared in Jon's chest, but he kept his voice level. "If you refuse to speak peacefully, more blood will spill. I asked for a truce, if only for a night. Let us sit, share a meal, and talk it through." The lord scoffed, but a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. The sight of Jon's dire wolf ghost pacing at his side and the presence of wildlings armed with rough axes and bows made him think twice about outright refusal. Finally, he grudgingly agreed to talk, if only to avoid immediate conflict. A tense gathering took place in the fort's main hall. Fires crackled in the hearth, the smell of roasted game mingling with the underlying tang of fear. Jon sat across from the rebellious lord and his men, both sides ringed by armed guards. They spoke in hushed tones about the demands, the crown's perspective, the need for compromise. Yet the lord's bitterness ran deep. Each time Jon offered a concession or an assurance that the taxes would be eased, the man spat about broken promises. Sansa tried to calm him, reminding him of the alliances that once saved all of Westeros. Eventually, the conversation devolved into shouting. The lord rose in anger, hand dropping to the hilt of his sword. His men followed suit, steel glinting in the firelight. Jon stood calmly, meeting the man's gaze. "No more blood," he said firmly, though a part of him dreaded that violence was inevitable. The Lord advanced, blade half-drawn. "I'll not be threatened by Southerners, nor by a man who claims to have died and come back. Perhaps you're some demon of the Lord of Light. I'll see you ended." Jon inhaled slowly. He did not want to escalate, but the threat was plain. In a single fluid motion, he drew long claw, the steel shimmering with a faint, ghostly light. At the sight of it, the hall fell silent. Every man gaped at the luminous edge. The Lord faltered, his aggression wavering. Perhaps he recalled old tales whispered by his ancestors, the flaming sword of Azor Ahai, the magic that overcame the dead. Jon's voice cut through the hush. "This sword was tempered in sacrifice. I take no pleasure in drawing it. If you seek violence, know that it will lead only to more destruction. Our realm has suffered enough." The Lord stared, chest heaving. The other rebels averted their eyes, uncertain whether they faced a mere mortal or an instrument of ancient power. The tension in the air teetered on a knife's edge. Then, slowly, the Lord dropped his gaze, sliding his sword back into its scabbard. He sank onto the bench, muttering curses under his breath. "What would you have us do, Snow? Yield? Grovel to the crown? I'd rather die than see the North bled dry." Jon sheathed Lightbringer, though calling it that aloud felt strange. Its glow faded beneath the cloak as if content to sleep. "I ask that you let us find a better path," he said quietly. "I have no illusions that the crown is perfect. We can address the taxes and ensure fair representation. But if we tear each other apart, what point was there in surviving the long night?" Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The rebels exchanged glances. Finally, the Lord spoke in a subdued tone. "We'll talk," he said, voice gruff. "But mark my words, if the crown betrays us again, no ghostlight sword will stop the North from rising." Jon nodded. "Then we understand each other." In the days that followed, an uneasy armistice took shape. The rebellious houses agreed to send representatives to Winterfell for further negotiations, while the Crown, through Sansa and Bran, promised to re-evaluate the demands placed on the North. The solution was far from perfect, but it averted immediate violence and paved the way for incremental reforms. Jon recognized how fragile it was, how distrust lingered. But for the moment, they had staved off a crisis. Word of Jon's ghostlight sword spread through the North and beyond. Many dismissed it as rumor or a trick of the torchlight. But others believed more. Whispers floated south, passing from tavern to tavern, describing how Jon Snow, the man who had once died and risen, now carried a blade that glowed with otherworldly radiance. Some said it was proof he was Azor Ahai reborn. Others scoffed that if he were truly the legendary hero, he would have used that sword to slay the Night King himself instead of letting Arya Stark do the deed. Yet the rumors grew. Jon loathed the attention. He retreated often beyond the wall, taking Ghost on solitary treks, hunting in the quiet winter forests. The free folk accepted him as he was, neither worshipping him nor mocking him. He was just Jon to them, useful in a hunt, kind to those in need, a man who had once united them against a common threat. They did not care about prophecies. If anything, they told him to lighten up and share a drink. Tormund especially insisted that stories and songs needed to be made, that children in future generations should remember the man who came back from death and carried a glowing sword. Jon found himself smiling wearily at the suggestion. "There are enough songs," he would reply. "We need real peace, not legends." Still, he could not entirely escape the legacy that had been placed upon him. At times, he felt as though the blood of Rhaegar Targaryen, that lineage of dragon lords, stirred in his veins, and the stoic resilience of the Starks anchored him. That duality was the source of his new power, perhaps. The forging of Lightbringer, an event that fate had delayed until he had faced the greatest agony of his life, now provided a subtle but potent influence on the realm. When he spoke, people listened. When he advised mercy, hearts softened. When he warned of looming danger, men grew vigilant. He did not take advantage of this influence for personal gain. Instead, he labored tirelessly to rebuild trust and understanding among the houses and to strengthen the Night's Watch in its new role as protectors of the northern border from more mundane threats like bandits and raiders. In King's Landing, far removed from these northern struggles, King Bran heard the rumors of the new Lightbringer. In his chamber of weirwood roots and shadows, he reached out with his far-seeing mind, glimpsing echoes of the blade's soft glow. The three-eyed king understood better than most that the future was fluid, shaped by countless choices. Yet the presence of that sword and the man who bore it provided a guiding current. The realm would need it in the coming years, for though winter had receded and the others were gone, new darkness could always arise from mortal ambition or outside threats. Thus, Jon Snow's destiny, delayed for so long, finally unfolded in its own quiet way. He would not conquer kingdoms with dragon fire nor sit upon the Iron Throne. He would not be hailed universally as the prince who was promised. Most small folk only knew him as a northerner who fought valiantly in the wars and vanished beyond the wall. Yet for those who saw the pale glow of his sword, who heard him speak with gentle wisdom born of heartbreak, who stood in awe of the man who carried the weight of prophecy without succumbing to arrogance, he became a symbol of what the realm could be at its best. Deep into the quiet nights, in the hush of a refurbished chamber in Winterfell or the rough lodging beyond the wall, Jon would stare at Longclaw, now imbued with that ghostly luminescence, and remember the steps that had led him here, the heartbreak of Ygritte, the betrayal of his black brothers, the resurrection by Melisandre, the death of Daenerys Targaryen by his own hand. Each was a crucible, forging his soul as surely as steel is hammered on an anvil. He realized that the prophecies never guaranteed a triumphant or joyous path. They only hinted at transformation and responsibility. Sometimes he wondered if Daenerys' spirit lingered somewhere, watching him with tear-stained eyes, questioning why events had to unfold the way they did. He hoped she understood that he had loved her, that her memory would remain entwined with the blazing gift she'd left him, the resolve to protect the realm without succumbing to tyranny. Perhaps, in a way, she had helped forge the sword as much as he had. Perhaps their love, doomed though it was, had been the final spark that gave Lightbringer its power. And so Jon Snow lived on, not as a king seated upon a throne of swords, but as a quiet guardian of the North, a man shaped by ice and tempered by fire. Whenever conflicts brewed, his presence had a calming effect. Whenever talk of war arose, he would remind them of the cost of the innocence left in the ashes. Whenever men of ambition tried to seize more territory or power, they found themselves facing the steady gaze of the one who had sacrificed his own heart's desire for the realm's greater good. In these ways, he slowly reshaped the politics of Westeros, not through conquest but through counsel and the gentle push of moral authority. It was a subtle, painstaking work, far from the grand heroic images people might conjure at the mention of Azor Ahai, but it was, in its own way, a shield protecting the living from the darkness in their own hearts. Seasons passed and a new spring dawned over the land. Fields began to bloom again in the riverlands, the snows thawed more quickly in the north, and merchant ships once more ventured between the harbors of Dorne and the Vale. King Bran's reign stabilized as he introduced knowledge gleaned from his visions, improving roads and fostering new trade. Sansa Stark, ruling Winterfell in his stead, oversaw a prosperous north that no longer feared the tyranny of monsters, neither whites nor maniacal kings. Many of the young generation knew little of the war against the dead, seeing it as a distant tale, something parents invoked to keep children respectful. But a few keen minds remembered the role Jon Snow played. They would travel north, past the gift, to seek the legendary Ghostlight sword and the man who wielded it. They found him among the free folk, older and more lined with care, yet still carrying an aura of quiet purpose. He met them with courtesy, listened to their stories of petty troubles in southern courts, or looming feuds on the horizon. He never boasted, never claimed any particular destiny. But if asked to help, he would sheathe Lightbringer by his side and journey south to offer aid, bridging gaps, resolving disputes, occasionally drawing the blade when peace was threatened. The sword would shine in the gloom, a reminder of what had been lost in pursuit of victory and the cost that each man and woman must be willing to bear if they hope to preserve the fragile peace. In this manner, the prophecy of Azor Ahai found its fulfillment not in a single cataclysmic battle, though Jon fought many battles, but in the ongoing labor of protecting the realm from ruin. The spark of the sword's flame had been delayed until Jon was ready to accept that the greatest danger lay not merely in mystical foes but in mankind's capacity for cruelty and ambition. Only once he had confronted the heartbreak of ending Daenerys' reign of fire could he rise to become the tempered champion the world truly needed. At times, Jon would wake from nightmares recalling the screams in King's Landing or the cold eyes of the Night King, only to find a gentle white glow at his bedside. Lightbringer seemed to sense his turmoil, illuminating the darkness just enough to remind him that he was never alone in carrying his burdens. He would run a hand through Ghost's fur, stare at the blade for a long while, and remind himself that though fate had burdened him, it had also granted him a chance to make a better future for those who could not defend themselves. And thus, in the living memory of the North and beyond, Jon Snow, once a bastard of Winterfell, once a brother of the Night's Watch, once a king in the North, once the lover of a queen he had to slay, became Azor Ahai, reborn in a quieter, more enduring sense. His destiny, delayed by the twisting paths of war, by betrayal, and by the illusions of power, found fruition at last. His sword glowed not to blind enemies with fire, but to guide a realm wounded by centuries of conflict into a fragile but hopeful peace. A generation later, parents would tell their children of the pale sword that glimmered in the cold, the man who had died and returned, the one who bore the anguish of sacrificing his beloved to save the realm. Some would scorn it as myth, while others found comfort in the notion that somewhere in the far north, a man kept vigil. In the darkest nights, when snowdrifts towered and wolves howled, a faint radiance could sometimes be glimpsed from the old watchtowers. They said it was Jon Snow, the delayed champion of ice and fire, standing guard so that no new terror would catch the realm unprepared. No grand statue was ever erected in his honor, no formal epic penned to rival the legends of Aegon the Conqueror. Yet across Westeros, whenever folk recalled the darkest chapters of their history, they would also remember the calm presence of a man whose love and honor had cost him everything, and in doing so, forged a sword that, in its own modest glow, kept the horrors of tyranny and chaos at bay. And so long as that blade remained alight, the realm knew that though winter might come again, and men's hearts might falter, there was always a guardian watching in the north, ready to answer the call of duty one more time. His destiny, delayed but never denied, was to safeguard the living. And if he carried a shadow of grief in his eyes, that was the price of being Azor Ahai. He did not seek praise or recognition. He only sought to ensure that the horrors he had witnessed, from the undead legions to the dragonfire that scorched innocence, would not be repeated in the land he loved. So he moved forward, day by day, forging unity where discord threatened, a living testament to the truth that the greatest battles are not always fought on the fields of open war, but in the hearts of men. In that quiet, unassuming manner, Jon Snow, a man once labeled a bastard whose claim to greatness had been hidden, became the watchful flame in the darkness, the herald of a new dawn that might yet rise over Westeros. The winter winds still gusted around the old stones of Castle Black, although the worst of the cold had eased in the passing months. The new watchers were few and far between, sparse companies of men who had joined the Night's Watch out of tradition or penance rather than to guard against the vanished threat of the others. They still kept the fires going, patrolled the ramparts, and preserved that ancient ritual of discipline, though their nights were considerably quieter than the days when a ghastly horde of wights pressed against the wall. Jon Snow stood by a brazier near the old elevator mechanism and looked out on the frosted plains stretching far to the south. Somewhere beyond that reach lay Winterfell, sturdy and alive, bustling with new prosperity under Sansa's stewardship. Further still, along roads grown safer under the watchful eyes of King Bran's Reeves, were the Riverlands, the Vale, King's Landing, and all the patchwork of lords and ladies who now fell under Bran's reign. Jon could almost picture them like a tapestry, courtiers whispering in the Red Keep's halls, blacksmiths hammering away in the forges of the Reach, fishermen hauling nets off the Stormland's coasts. But here, at the wall, most of that busy tapestry seemed very far away. Jon found that he could breathe more freely in the stillness. He had come to Castle Black often these past months, shuttling between the north and the free folk territories beyond. The Night's Watch was no longer the same institution he had once served. There were fewer Black brothers and they seldom received fresh recruits, but it held on to some semblance of dignity. The watchman who remained saluted Jon whenever he passed, a gesture equal parts respect for who he had been and awe for who he had become. Late in the afternoon, he descended the stairs into the courtyard, boots scraping over stones still caked with patches of ice. He intended to continue northward in a day or two, back to the company of Tormund Giants Bane and the Free Folk. Perhaps he would stay for a moon's turn or until another raven summoned him to some corner of the realm. No matter how many times he told himself he was done with the obligations of lords and ladies, calls for help still found him. Lord Snow rasped an aging brother of the Watch, once a steward under Jeor Mormont. "Shall we prepare you a horse?" Jon dipped his head. "Aye, but not till tomorrow. Thank you." The brother nodded and plodded away, leaving Jon to his private thoughts. The ravens in Maester Aemon's old rookery clucked and cawed, a reminder of how many nights Jon had spent here, unaware then of all the tragedies and revelations that awaited him. It struck him sometimes like an echo that he had been a boy with a battered sense of self-worth, believing himself merely a stark bastard, then a man who gave his life for the realm, then a resurrected soul, cursed and gifted with the sword that now rested at his hip. Lightbringer, though he still rarely used that name aloud, could not be mistaken for ordinary steel anymore. Its pale shimmer was visible even in daytime if one looked closely. By night, there was no denying its presence, an otherworldly radiance that made some men think of ghosts and made others whisper prophecy. Jon exhaled, turned from the courtyard, and headed into the dim interior of the common hall. The warmth of the hearth enveloped him, and he spotted a slight figure standing near the flames, robed in somber gray. When the figure turned, John recognized Dolores Edison Tollett, who once served alongside John as a fellow steward, then a trusted friend. Ed's expression had always seemed resigned to doom, but it now bore something near to happiness. "They're calling you back south again," Ed said in lieu of greeting, letting his hood fall from his head to reveal a smattering of new wrinkles. "Word is there's trouble in the Vale. Something about an upstart band of hedge knights who claim they have the late Lord Baelish's hidden fortune. They're causing unrest and harassing travelers across the mountain passes." John grimaced faintly. "I was hoping for at least another quiet fortnight before we had more trouble. I suppose the realm never lacks for it. Any other news from the Ravens?" Ed shrugged with the humorless sigh that had earned him his moniker. "Fewer messages these days, seeing as we're less needed as watchers. But that's one that came. The Vale might need assistance from someone who can speak with authority on behalf of the crown, and, well, our new king is not so easily moved from the Red Keep. Queen," he hesitated, realizing no queen sat the throne now, only King Bran. "Lady Sansa can only do so much from Winterfell." John had served as a mediator a dozen times by now, traveling to calm rebellious lords and defuse conflicts left in the wake of the war. Every time, he brought only a modest retinue, perhaps Tormund or a few free folk or the occasional loyal retainer from the north. Yet the glowing sword was often enough to dissuade bloodshed. Men did not want to cross the rumored Azor Ahai reborn, the rumored second life of Jon Snow. Over time, they had learned that Jon's presence promised fairness as well as a sense of moral gravity that left the unscrupulous uneasy. He nodded to Ed. "Thank you for letting me know. If there's trouble in the Vale, I'll see to it soon." His voice dropped. "Though each time I step into another dispute, I wonder if that's truly my purpose, to be some wandering arbiter for every petty grievance in the realm." Ed's expression was droll. "Better an arbiter than a corpse. I remember the days we trudged beyond the wall, thinking we'd be White Chow at any minute. This kind of trouble might be less glorious, but it's also less likely to rip your guts out." John snorted softly. "We'll see about that," he said. "Sometimes dealing with ambitious men can be more treacherous than fighting the Night King." At least the Night King was honest in his threat. They both turned as a pair of black brothers entered, shaking off the cold. Their voices hummed in low conversation about the day's chores. John felt a momentary pang of nostalgia for simpler times, even if simpler meant standing watch against an unspeakable menace. The clarity of war had a way of uniting men. Peace, ironically, often made them fractious, cunning, and suspicious. He took his leave of Ed and found lodging in one of the old officers' quarters. Dust motes drifted in the torchlight as he doffed his cloak and hung it on a peg. Ghost entered behind him, the white direwolf still a silent sentinel that rarely left his side. For a time, John sat by the flickering candles, mind drifting over the thought of returning south. He remembered the Vale from his youth, how Ned Stark had fostered with Jon Arryn, how the Vale itself was a fortress in the mountains. And, of course, the Eyrie perched on its pinnacle, a seat that had once belonged to Lisa Arryn and, through twisted manipulations, to the cunning Peter Baelish. Even after Baelish's demise, traces of his scheming had lingered in the cracks of the Vale's politics. John would try, as he always did, to keep the peace. Yet he sensed that the work might be endless. Sometimes the realm felt like a wounded creature that refused to heal, always pawing at its bandages. Was it truly his destiny to wander endlessly, sword in hand, setting to right the crooked ways of lords and knights? He placed a hand on the hilt of his sword, feeling the subtle warmth that emanated even in the chill air. The blade responded to his touch, a faint glow pulsing along its length. He closed his eyes. That night, he dreamt of a field of ash, the remains of a great city battered by dragonfire. Daenerys stood at its center, pale hair swirling like smoke, eyes full of a grief and rage that he knew well. Her voice echoed in the hush. "You were supposed to build a better world with me." Then she receded, as though swallowed by swirling cinders, and John saw the Iron Throne crumble into molten slag. He reached for her, but she dissolved. He woke with a gasp. The candle had burned down, leaving a faint wisp of smoke curling in the darkness. Ghost lifted his head, ears pricked. John's heart pounded. Even years after that fateful day in the throne room, his remorse clung to him. Perhaps no measure of good deeds would wipe away the stain of what he had done. Yet each day he tried, at least in small ways, to honor her memory by preventing another descent into tyranny or chaos. But on nights like these, he wondered if she would ever forgive him, even in death. He rose at dawn, made his preparations, and by midday, he departed Castle Black with Ghost and a small group of watchers who volunteered to accompany him as far as Queensgate. From there, he would continue south to Winterfell, gather more information from Sansa, and then press onward to the Vale. The wind was fierce on the King's Road, but the snow had melted to reveal patches of brown earth. The air smelled faintly of pine and thawing mud, reminders that springtime approached. They traveled for days, stopping at sparse villages along the road. Locals greeted Jon with a mix of awe and camaraderie, offering lodging and simple meals. He never turned them down, being mindful that refusing hospitality could wound fragile pride. Over bowls of hearty stew, villagers told him rumors, travelers harassed in the mountains near the Bloody Gate, bandits wearing some device that resembled a mockingbird sigil, and the Vale's new Lord Protector, Jon Royce, stretched thin as he tried to protect the region. Royce, a stolid man known for his bronze armor, had once mistrusted all foreign influences. But in the new reign he had softened somewhat, forging alliances with King Bran and Sansa. Yet these roving hedge knights and outlaws threatened to destabilize the Vale's tenuous peace. One evening, as Jon sat by the hearth in a small village inn, a bard began singing a song about the fall of the Night King, praising Arya Stark as the hero of the Long Night. The tavern patrons cheered at the mention of the faceless girl who leapt from darkness, driving a dagger of Valyrian steel into the ancient foe. Jon felt a warm swell of pride for his sister, but as the bard continued, he realized his own part in that conflict had become something of a footnote. When the bard reached the verse about the newly crowned King Bran and the subsequent destruction of King's Landing by the Mad Queen Daenerys, the crowd grew somber. The refrain hinted that the Mad Queen's rampage ended only because a valiant lover slew her. But it did not name Jon Snow. It only referred to him as a sorrowful figure lost to the shadows. Jon sipped his ale quietly. He wasn't sure if he felt relieved or stung that the ballad veiled his identity. Did he want people to know it was he who put an end to Daenerys? He still wrestled with that moral burden. Perhaps it was better that they saw him as a ghost, an unnamed wanderer who had receded to the far north. And yet, that act, her death, had been the catalyst for forging the sword at his side. The echoes of prophecy still haunted him, and some nights he believed his entire life had been shaped by forces he could neither see nor control. When he reached Winterfell, it was near dusk. The snow-capped towers rose before him, lit by torches along the battlements. He was greeted by the guards, who recognized him at once and ushered him through the gates with quick salutes. In the courtyard, stable hands rushed to tend his horse, and a few curious onlookers pointed out Ghost, whispering about the size of the white direwolf. Jon slid down from the saddle, feeling the old familiarity of Winterfell's worn stones beneath his boots. He found Sansa in her solar, conferring with Maester Wolkan over some ledger about food stores and trade routes. The flicker of candlelight revealed the red in her hair as she looked up, and a trace of relief crossed her face at seeing Jon. She dismissed the maester with a polite nod, then met Jon halfway across the room, embracing him warmly. "You've heard about the Vale trouble," she said without preamble, pressing her hands to his. "I was going to send a rider north to find you, but you beat me to it." "I heard rumors," Jon said, all pointing to some group of hedge knights or mercenaries stirring up chaos on the mountain roads. Sansa's lips thinned. Lord Royce sent a raven describing raids on remote villages. They claimed to be seeking something left behind by Peter Baelish, some hidden gold, or a trove of blackmail documents. No one's quite sure. They're terrorizing small folk, searching houses, threatening to burn them if they don't hand over Littlefinger's hoard. Most think it's nonsense, a rumor turned cult. But rumor or not, they're armed and they're leaving blood in their wake. Jon sighed. "I'll go. I suspect Jon Royce will have the men to fight them, but perhaps my presence could help avoid a prolonged clash. These rebels might be open to reason. If not, I'll do what I can to protect the Vale." She studied him, gray eyes thoughtful, and gestured for him to sit. She poured him a cup of mead from a polished flagon. "I know you're tired, Jon. After all this time, traveling from one hot spot to another, putting out fires, never settling. I wish things were different. But the realm is fractious even in peace." She paused, voice softening. "And to be honest, your name still carries weight. Men see in you something." She didn't say Azor Ahai or Lightbringer, but he heard the unspoken. "They trust you because you ask for nothing but peace. That's rare in a world of lords who crave power." He nodded, accepting the cup. "I understand. The realm's better than it was in the days after the Great War, but sometimes it feels like I'm chasing shadows, never making a lasting change. He took a sip, the honeyed flavor warming him. But I'll keep trying. Tell me everything you know about these raiders. She recounted the details in quiet but precise tones, how they wore scraps of armor bearing a crude mockingbird symbol, the same sigil Baelish once used, how they operated near the base of the Giant's Lance, retreating into narrow mountain passes after their strikes. Rumor held that they might have a minor noble's daughter in tow, kidnapped to ransom for information on Baelish's rumored stash. It was said they believed some coded documents existed in a hidden vault near the Eyrie, detailing extortion material that could manipulate half the lords of Westeros if revealed. Jon listened closely, mulling over the shape of the threat. At length, he rubbed his jaw. I'll go as soon as I can. With any luck, we can end this swiftly. I'll ask Yohn Royce to march out in force. If the rebels see me, perhaps they'll... He stopped himself. What exactly would they do? Surrender? Attack him? The memory of other near conflicts flickered through his mind, how men often hesitated at the sight of his glowing sword, how they might drop their weapons rather than face a legend. But these hedge knights might be desperate. Desperate men with illusions of grand fortune could be more dangerous than proud lords. Sansa placed a gentle hand on his arm. Be careful, she said. They're hungry for something that might not even exist. And that kind of hunger is never rational. He covered her hand with his, grateful for her support. I will be. And you take care of yourself here. How's the North faring otherwise? She let out a small, weary laugh. Better. The harvest was decent. The rebuilding has gone well enough, and we've had fewer quarrels among the houses, thanks in large part to your earlier mediation. Still, there's always something. House Glover pressing for more farmland, House Serwyn worried about port duties, the Manderleys wanting lower taxes if they expand White Harbor's fleet. But it's normal. Or as normal as it gets. He tried to smile. Then maybe we're closer to a true peace. Let's hope so, Sansa said softly, and her gaze flicked to the sword at his hip. The pommel glowed faintly in the candlelit gloom, a constant reminder of the deeper currents swirling beneath the realm's surface. Jon spent that night in his old chambers, the ones he had occupied briefly after freeing Winterfell from the Boltons. The fur blankets smelled of lavender and dust, and the air was still. Ghost curled at the foot of the bed, occasionally lifting his head at the slightest noise in the corridor. Jon lay awake longer than he wished, thoughts drifting between the uncertain future and the ghosts of the past. He remembered how Daenerys once spoke of breaking the wheel, forging a world without tyrants. Sometimes he wondered if his reluctant guardianship was fulfilling even a fraction of that dream. Yet the realm's wheel still turned, albeit more slowly, and every so often a spoke threatened to break free. Early the next morning, he bid farewell to Sansa and rode out with a small contingent of 12 men, some northern guards, others old watch veterans who volunteered. They passed the Wolfswood under gray skies. The hush of tall pines formed a natural cathedral around them. Birds flitted among branches, small animals skittered in the underbrush. Jon felt the tension in his shoulders, realizing he was preparing for yet another negotiation that might escalate into bloodshed. At midday they came upon an abandoned holdfast. It was made of rough-hewn logs, half-burned, and Sansa had mentioned it in passing, the site of a raid weeks earlier, possibly by the same band of hedge knights. Jon and his party dismounted to investigate. Smoke no longer rose from the charred timbers, and the wind carried only the faint acrid scent of soot. With careful steps, Jon peered into the remnants of what might have been a stable. Ash crumbled underfoot, revealing rusted horseshoes. One of the older watch veterans, Benric, knelt by a scorched post. Looks like they torched it in a hurry. Probably to flush out anyone hiding inside. He shook his head grimly. Monsters. All for a rumor about gold. Jon glanced around the destruction, eyes narrowing. Desperate men do terrible things. Keep your guard up from here on. We're still a few days' ride to the Vale's border. They remounted, traveling until dusk. The next evening, they spotted the first signs of Vale banners near a crossroads, the Moon and Falcon standard flapping from a wooden watchtower. A pair of sentries emerged, halting Jon's group until they recognized him and welcomed him forward. From them, Jon learned that Lord Royce's forces were gathering at the Gates of the Moon, the castle situated at the base of the mountain road leading up to the Eyrie. That would be Jon's next destination. By the time they reached the Gates of the Moon, the weather had grown milder, though the peaks looming overhead remained shrouded in white. The castle's courtyard bustled with knights, soldiers, and servants. Jon led his entourage inside, dismounting near a fountain shaped like a hawk's wings. Ghost padded at his flank, drawing startled looks from grooms and stable hands who had never seen a dire wolf that large. The steward approached, recognized Jon, and bowed with flustered reverence. Lord Royce awaits you in the Great Hall, the steward said in a trembling voice. He's only just returned from a skirmish. John tensed at the word skirmish. He nodded, handed off his reins to a stable boy, and made his way inside. The corridors were paneled in dark wood, lit by large windows that allowed mountain sunlight to spill in. He recalled the gates of the moon from years ago. Peter Baelish once held it, warding the area above. Now it seemed the veil had reclaimed itself from that shadow. Yet echoes of Baelish's cunning might linger in the hearts of men. Lord Yon Royce rose from a high-backed chair when John entered the hall. Royce was a tall, imposing figure, hair gone silver, clad in partial armor decorated with runes that signified his family's ancient lineage. He met John with a curt nod that carried respect. "Snow," Royce said. He was one of the few who continued to use John's old name either out of habit or lack of concern for titles. "I'm grateful for your arrival." John approached, noting the tension in Royce's posture. "I came as soon as I heard about the raids." Royce's face tightened. "We encountered them 2 days ago near a village by the mountain foothills. They have skill, some of them appear to be former soldiers or trained knights. We lost a handful of men in the fighting, and they retreated deeper into the mountains, taking at least 3 villagers hostage. They brandish that mockingbird sigil as if it's a rightful banner. Talk about Baelish's lost gold. Bloody nonsense. Even if Baelish had such a stash, it's likely scattered or worthless by now." John frowned. "Is there any truth to the rumor? Did Baelish leave behind documents or a secret trove?" Royce snorted. "Nothing I've found. When Lady Sansa parted ways with Peter Baelish, she and Arya took his records. Most were worthless once his network realized he was dead. If there's some hidden stash of gold, we've yet to see it. We have more pressing concerns anyway. These outlaws are hurting our small folk." John nodded. "We'll ride out to find them. If they're willing to parley, I'll try. If not, we'll do what we must." Royce studied John's face, then let his gaze fall to the sword at John's hip. The light was subdued in the hall, but the blade's edge caught a ghostly gleam. Royce's expression was difficult to read, some mixture of curiosity and a hint of wariness. "You truly do carry something remarkable," he said. "I've heard the tales, but I never believed in magic swords." John shifted. "It's Valyrian steel that's been changed. That's all." Royce didn't press further. Perhaps he preferred to keep his doubts to himself. "Tomorrow morning we'll set out. My scouts believe the bandits have a hideout in the higher passes. We'll need to travel lightly or risk losing them in narrow terrain." John concurred. "I have only a small group and I can move quickly. Let's prepare." They discussed the plan in low tones. Later, John was shown to a modest guest chamber, a place once used by lesser lords or traveling knights. He removed his cloak and armor piece by piece, laying them carefully on a wooden bench. Ghost curled near the foot of the bed, maintaining a vigilant watch. John rolled his shoulders, weary from days in the saddle. He wondered if these bandits would surrender peaceably or if more blood must be shed. Despite the dire circumstances, he sometimes felt relief that at least the battles he fought now were with mortal men, not undead nightmares. Yet mortal men could be nightmares of their own making. Morning found him waking early, the dawn light painting the snow-capped mountains in soft pink hues. In the courtyard, Yon Royce had assembled a lean band of Vale knights and archers, perhaps 50 or 60 men. They had sturdy horses and mules laden with supplies. John gathered his small retinue, greeting them briefly. Then they set forth, leaving the castle behind, hooves clattering on the stony road that wound uphill. The air grew thinner as they ascended, and soon they passed the bloody gate, an ancient fortress carved between 2 sheer cliffs. The gate's garrison saluted, recognizing Lord Royce's banners, allowing them to pass without hindrance. Beyond, the mountains loomed, austere and beautiful. Loose gravel crunched underfoot, and the horses snorted white plumes of breath. Pine trees clung to rock faces, and small streams cut channels through the valleys. The path narrowed to a single file at times. Scouts rode ahead, scanning for any sign of the bandits. The day wore on, and with it, a sense of heightened alert. John kept his gaze sweeping the ridges above, half expecting an ambush. Bands of unscrupulous men often chose vantage points, rolling boulders or loosing arrows upon unwary travelers. But hour followed hour without incident. By dusk, they found an abandoned campsite, recently vacated. Scattered footprints suggested a dozen or more men, plus mules. Vale scouts knelt by the cold fire pit, sifting ashes. "They can't be more than a few hours ahead," one scout muttered. "But it's dangerous to press on at night in these passes." Royce agreed. They would make their own camp, then resume pursuit at dawn. The knights pitched tents, tethered horses, and took watch rotations. The mood was tense, men speaking in hushed voices as they cooked a simple meal over a low fire. John recognized that old feeling of preparing for conflict, the subtle current of anticipation that ran through every soldier's veins. He took a seat near the camp's edge, Ghost resting at his side, glancing out at the twilight gloom. A swirl of wind carried the scent of pine and damp stone. The mountains that towered around them had seen countless generations come and go, all with their own ambitions, feuds, and tragedies. How many times had men fought here, driven by gold or revenge? Unbidden, John's mind drifted again to Daenerys. He pictured her once riding Drogon across the skies, aflame with purpose to free the oppressed. Then he remembered the destruction of King's Landing and the heartbreak that followed. If she had lived, would she have found a way to quell petty bandits like these with a gesture of her hand? Or would they all have burned? The line between justice and terror had grown so blurred in her final hours. He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to shake free of those reflections. One of the Vale Knights approached, a young man with earnest eyes, stopping a polite distance away. "My lord," he said, bowing. "I'm Ser Ryman Belmore. I've heard stories of you, your sword, your deeds. Is it true you died once and came back?" He spoke the question hesitantly, as though half frightened of the answer. John gave him a level look. "I did," he said quietly. "But that was years ago." The knight nodded slowly, digesting this. "Some men say you're Azor Ahai reborn, that you carry Lightbringer. That you ended the long night." John hesitated. "Arya Stark ended the Night King," he corrected gently. "I only fought alongside her and many others. As for the rest, prophecies can be misunderstood." Ryman looked abashed but also curious. "Still, I'm grateful. My uncle died at the Battle of Winterfell, but my cousin survived. He said we'd all have perished if you and the others hadn't gathered the armies. So thank you." John inclined his head in acknowledgement. "We all did what we had to, Ser Ryman." The knight bowed again and stepped away, leaving John with his thoughts. That was often how these encounters went. People approached him hesitantly, their heads brimming with rumors or legends, only to leave with half their questions unanswered. In truth, John did not believe he had the kind of answers they wanted. Prophecies of grand destiny rarely ended as expected. Sleep was restless that night, occasionally jarred by the crisp wind rattling loose stones. Morning came gray and cold, with clouds threatening snow. John and Royce's men broke camp quickly and set out again, following fresh footprints that meandered into a higher pass. The terrain grew treacherous, the trails skirting sheer drops into mist-filled valleys. Occasionally, Ghost bounded ahead, sniffing the air, returning with ears pricked. Shortly before midday, their scouts signaled caution. They had found more signs of human activity near a ravine up ahead. John urged his horse forward, meeting the scouts at a rocky outcrop. From that vantage, he glimpsed a cluster of figures below, perhaps 15 to 20 men, along with pack mules hidden among a sparse copse of pines. They were close enough that John could see glints of metal. Some men wore mismatched armor. A few brandished battered shields, each painted with a mockingbird symbol, albeit crudely done. Royce eyed them from behind the outcrop, brow furrowed. "They're cornered if we approach from both sides. The ravine funnels them. We can attempt to parley from above." John studied the scene. "Let me go first. They might be more inclined to speak if they see a smaller group. If it's an ambush, you can charge in." Royce didn't look entirely comfortable with the plan, but he nodded. "I'll position archers along the ridge. You ride down with a handful of men." John called for 5 volunteers, Ser Ryman, 2 Vale archers, and 2 of John's own watchers from the north. They picked their way down a narrow path into the ravine, the horses stepping carefully over loose stones. John kept his posture calm, but he had a hand near the hilt of his sword, hidden beneath his cloak. Ghost followed close behind on silent paws. At the bottom, they emerged from behind a bend to see the outlaws, who had now noticed the approaching riders. A tall man at the forefront raised his hand, halting his fellows. He was gaunt but broad-shouldered, with lank brown hair curling around a beaked nose. His breastplate bore a crudely painted mockingbird. He leveled a spear at John's party. "That's far enough," he shouted, voice echoing off the rocky walls. "Who are you?" John urged his horse a step forward. "I'm Jon Snow. I've come on behalf of Lord Royce and the Vale. I want to talk." A flicker of confusion crossed the man's face. Perhaps he recognized the name. Some of the outlaws behind him exchanged nervous glances. One hissed, "It's the one rumored to carry the magic sword." The spear wielder scowled. "Magic sword or no, we've no quarrel with you if you leave us be. Move along." John noticed two frightened villagers tied near a mule, their faces smudged with dirt. "You're holding hostages," John called, voice steady. "Release them, and maybe we can reach an understanding." A bitter laugh erupted from one of the outlaws, a woman with braided hair and a savage grin. "Oh, we're past understandings. Not unless you know where Baelish's stash is." John inhaled slowly. "I don't. There's no gold trove or blackmail vault. If Peter Baelish hid something, it's been lost or rendered useless by now. You're terrorizing small folk for a phantom." A ripple of doubt passed among the outlaws, but their leader steadied his spear. "We've heard that Sansa Stark took Baelish's notes. Maybe you want it for yourself. We know you were close to the Starks." John's patience thinned. "Let the villagers go. If you want to speak of terms, I'll listen. But you have to stop these raids." A moment of silence, tension building. Then the tall bandit gave a mocking sneer. "We're done talking. You show up with knights and archers hidden in the cliffs. We're not fools." He raised his spear in a threatening motion. "We'll leave if you hand over a ransom. Gold and horses. Then we'll let these hostages go." John's jaw tightened. He glanced up at the ridges, aware that Royce's men were likely aiming crossbows. The air felt electric. "We're not paying you to release hostages you had no right to seize," John said. "You stand down or you face the Vale's justice." The tall man's eyes flicked from John to Ghost, then back. He seemed to consider lunging with his spear. John's grip shifted beneath his cloak, brushing Lightbringer's hilt. A faint glow might have shone beneath the fabric because the bandit's eyes widened fractionally. "You," the outlaw said through clenched teeth, "the one who killed the Dragon Queen. I've heard tales. You want to stand in our way, bastard?" John's chest constricted at the reference to Daenerys. He recalled every drop of blood, every tear. Keeping his voice even, he said, "Stop this now. You'll only find death in these mountains if you continue." The woman behind the leader barked a command and several outlaws raised crossbows. John's group tensed. Ser Ryman's hand drifted to his sword. Ghost gave a low warning growl, hackles rising. For a moment, the world seemed to pause in that precarious balance between negotiation and violence. Then a crossbow twanged from the outlaw's line, sending a quarrel whizzing past John's head. Chaos erupted. Royce's men on the ridge shouted and unleashed arrows. The outlaws scrambled, some diving for cover behind boulders. John kicked his horse forward, sweeping his cloak aside, letting Lightbringer's pallid glow shine openly. The sword caught the faint sunlight, magnifying the eerie luminance along its edge. In the ensuing confusion, the bandits gaped, some faltering. But others, driven by fear or desperation, fired crossbows at John and his companions. Ser Ryman's horse reared, an arrow striking the beast's flank. The knight tumbled off with a startled cry, shield raised. John guided his own mount in a tight circle, blocking another quarrel with Lightbringer, the steel ringing out in a burst of sparks. Ghost lunged at the ankles of one outlaw, dragging the man down before he could reload. On the ridge, Vale archers rained arrows, pinning outlaws behind rocks. The tall leader shouted, brandishing his spear. "Hold your ground," he roared, but some of his men began to break ranks, fleeing deeper into the ravine. The bound villagers screamed for help, cowering as arrows whistled overhead. John spurred his horse toward the hostages, sword raised to deflect any incoming shot. A pair of bandits rushed at him with axes. Lightbringer hummed in his grip, seeming lighter than normal steel, the glow intensifying with each strike. He parried one axe blow, then pivoted to slam his pommel into the second attacker's chest. The man staggered, eyes full of fear at the sword's ethereal shine. He dropped his axe and stumbled back. But the tall leader closed in from John's flank, spear leveled. John glimpsed him in the corner of his eye and twisted in the saddle. The spear thrust grazed his horse's neck. The animal neighed in panic, stumbling. John slid from the saddle to avoid falling under the thrashing hooves. He landed hard on the rocky ground, rolling to keep hold of Lightbringer. The leader advanced, face twisted with rage. "You stand in our way for gold that isn't even yours?" he spat. John rose into a defensive stance. "You're killing innocents for a rumor. You've lost your honor," he growled back. The leader lunged. John sidestepped, bringing Lightbringer up in a glimmering arc. The man tried to parry with his spear shaft, but Valyrian steel sheared through wood, slicing the spearhead clean off. With the next move, John disarmed him entirely. The bandit stumbled back, fear dawning in his eyes. Then he made a desperate grab for a dagger at his belt, but John bashed the hilt of his sword against the man's wrist, sending the dagger skittering across the ground. The man sank to his knees, glaring. "You'd kill me for trying to survive?" John breathed heavily, recalling the faces of dozens he'd faced in the past. Survival doesn't justify murder and cruelty. Surrender, he demanded. That's your only chance to live now. Around them, the fighting was winding down. Royce's men pressed an attack from the ridge, cornering pockets of bandits. Some outlaws had scattered, fleeing into the rocks, likely to be hunted down by scouts. Others lay sprawled in the dirt, arrows in their torsos. A handful knelt, tossing aside weapons in surrender. The hostage villagers huddled behind a mule, eyes wide. Ser Ryman, bruised from his fall, had made it over to them, cutting their bonds. Ghost padded among the wounded bandits, sniffing warily. The tall leader spat, chest heaving. We'd have found the stash if you meddling lords hadn't. There is no stash, John reiterated. Peter Baelish is dead. His secrets died with him. Vale Knights arrived, binding the man's wrists and leading him away with the other prisoners. The bandit let out a final snarl. We'll all die as pawns of your kings and queens. This realm is rotten, there's nothing left for common men but scraps. John watched them drag him off, his mind churning. Another batch of desperate souls, misguided, latching on to myths of hidden gold. Perhaps the realm was still rotten in places, but he couldn't ignore the injustice that had driven these men to such extremes. Royce rode in from the side, reining up near John. We have them. Some fled, but I've got scouts in pursuit. We'll see that the prisoners are questioned, then punished accordingly. John nodded, sheathing Lightbringer. The soft glow subsided beneath the cloak, returning the ravine to a grim hush broken only by moans of the wounded. Thank you. See that the villagers are cared for. He exhaled a weary breath. I hope this ends the raids. We'll root out any remnants, Royce assured him, dismounting with a clank of armor. We'll make sure they can't reorganize. The Vale owes you thanks, Jon Snow. Once again, you've saved us bloodshed. Jon surveyed the battlefield, bodies in the dirt, the tang of iron in the air, the haunted expressions of men who had surrendered. He felt little satisfaction. The cost was plain, more dead, more grief. But perhaps fewer innocents would suffer now. If he had to weigh the scales, this was better than letting the outlaws terrorize the Vale unchecked. They spent the rest of the day gathering the wounded and the dead, giving what mercy they could. The uninjured prisoners were chained and marched back down the pass, flanked by Royce's knights. A handful of bandits who escaped might harry them in future, but the core of the threat was broken. John tried to reassure the freed villagers, who thanked him shakily before being placed on horses for the journey back to the Gates of the Moon. At dusk, the surviving knights and watchers built a grim camp, too tired to descend further. John sat near a small fire, ignoring his own bruises, and allowed a Vale squire to tend his horse's wound. Ghost settled at his feet. Royce approached, regarding him quietly. You always did have a knack for saving us from ourselves, Snow. John glanced up. Not always. I've seen how easily our realm can slip into ruin. Royce folded his arms, expression pensive. When the others were at our gates, everything was black and white, live or die. Now, in peace, men find new reasons to fight. Makes a man wonder if we'll ever truly be done with conflict. John rubbed a hand across his brow. Conflict might never end, but we can hope to limit the damage. If we can keep men from tearing each other apart for greed or ambition, that's worth doing. Royce nodded, then hesitated before placing a hand on John's shoulder. I heard what that outlaw said about Daenerys Targaryen. Pay him no mind. Many in the Vale know you did what was necessary to spare the realm. John stiffened. I appreciate the sentiment, but the realm lost something that day. I lost something. Royce's grip tightened comfortingly. Then he let go and stepped away. We'll speak more in the morning. He turned toward the Vale Knights, who were finishing a head count of the wounded. John bowed his head, letting the hush of evening settle around him. The day had been won, but it felt like another patch on a torn tapestry, each tear mended only to reveal more fraying edges. How many times would the realm repeat this cycle? He and Royce returned to the Gates of the Moon the following day, prisoners in tow. The battered outlaws were locked in cells, awaiting the Vale's justice. The hostages were returned to their families, tears of gratitude shining in their eyes. There was talk of a public trial where these bandits would be condemned for murder and banditry. John took no pleasure in that prospect, but he understood it had to be done to maintain order. Word of Jon Snow's role spread among the Vale. Within days, small folk whispered of how the man with the glowing sword had once more averted a greater calamity. Some told wildly exaggerated tales that Jon slew 10 men with a single stroke, or that his sword burned white-hot and blinded the bandits. In truth, the fight was messy and brutal, and he had no interest in embellishments. Royce insisted on hosting a modest feast in Jon's honor, a gesture of thanks. Jon relented, though he would have preferred a quiet departure. So that evening the great hall at the Gates of the Moon was lit with torches and candles, the tables lined with roasted game, fresh bread, and barrels of ale. Nobles from nearby towns attended, many eager to meet this famed savior. John sat at a place of prominence near Royce, trying to keep his responses polite but guarded. Throughout the feast, lords and ladies approached, praising him for putting an end to the bandit raids. Some were older lords who remembered the War of the Five Kings, others were younger, newly come into their inheritance. One lady, who introduced herself as Lady Ellis Wainwood, clasped his hands in thanks. Our caravans can pass more safely now, thanks to you. If there's anything we can offer, supplies, silver, please say so. John only shook his head. I need no reward. The North thanks the Vale for standing with us in the war against the dead. It was my duty to return the favor. She seemed perplexed by his refusal but nodded graciously. Others pressed him for stories of his battles beyond the wall or of King Bran's court. He answered sparingly, focusing on the collective effort that had saved the realm, not his personal feats. Meanwhile, servants refilled cups, minstrels played a lively tune, and the hall buzzed with conversation. Partway through the night, a hush fell as the doors opened to admit a handful of red-robed figures. Priests of Lawler, by the look of them foreign, with shaved heads and embroidered sashes depicting flames. They moved quietly amid curious stares, their presence unexpected. One stepped forward, a man with pale skin and eyes as dark as embers, bowing stiffly toward Lord Royce's table. My lord, he began, his accent thick with SOC inflections. We mean no intrusion. We have traveled far across the narrow sea, following signs in the flames. We heard the name of Jon Snow, the man rumored to carry the sword of prophecy. We wish to pay our respects. An uneasy murmur rippled across the feast. Lord Royce's lips pressed together. We're not in the habit of entertaining priests unannounced, he said warily. But as you are here, speak your piece. The priest's gaze slid to John, a spark of something like reverence in his eyes. Azor Ahai reborn, he said softly in the common tongue. We serve the Lord of Light, who reveals all in the fire. We have come to see the champion who ended the long night. John felt the hall's attention shift to him. He steadied his expression, ignoring the sudden tightness in his chest. I'm no champion of your faith, he replied. I'm merely a man who fought for the living. The priest lowered his eyes but persisted. That is why we come. The shadows across the sea stir once more. Reports speak of new powers rising in Esso's warlords in Slaver's Bay, a pretender. Claiming Targaryen blood in Volantis, strange rumors of sorcery in the Red Waste. The flames show us a time of upheaval. We believe Azor Ahai may be needed again, not just for Westeros but for all mankind. Silence hung like a blade in the air. Some Vale lords scoffed softly at the notion. Others wore uneasy expressions, recalling how Melisandre once proclaimed Stannis Baratheon as Azor Ahai. Jon's hand drifted under the table to rest on Lightbringer's hilt, the sword's subdued glow hidden. He forced a calm tone. I've already done what needed doing. The Night King was defeated. If you want a champion, you'll have to look elsewhere. The priest bowed deeper. Forgive me, but we humbly ask that you hear our plea. We do not deny your sacrifice in the Great War. Yet the flames whisper that your role is not ended. Jon locked his jaw. It felt as though every eye in the hall was upon him, waiting. He was weary of prophecies, of being a symbol. I have responsibilities here, he said. My family, this realm. I'm not a follower of Lawler. The priest lifted his head, voice thick with urgency. We do not seek to convert you, only to warn. The flame shows a gathering darkness in Essos. Perhaps it will never reach these shores, or perhaps it shall. We ask only that you remain vigilant. Jon couldn't help an inward sigh. Darkness, always darkness. Whether from ice or from men's own hearts, there was always another threat. He gave a curt nod. I understand. But I cannot promise anything. The hall remained hushed. Lord Royce cleared his throat. Your warning is noted, priest. Now, unless you plan to cause a disturbance, you may take a seat at the edge of the hall. We can discuss it further after the feast. Seeing the tension, the priest nodded humbly. His companions followed suit, retreating to a quiet corner. The minstrels resumed their tune and conversation gradually returned, though the mood was unsettled. Jon ate little for the remainder of the feast, his mind churned by the priest's words. A new darkness rising in Essos, he wondered if it was more than rumor. Tyrion Lannister had once said that power vacuums in the east often gave birth to chaos. And after Daenerys' death, her unsullied force had sailed to Noth, leaving Meereen and other freed cities vulnerable to opportunists. When at last the feast ended, Jon excused himself, too burdened for polite farewells. In the corridor, he paused by a window, gazing at the pale moonlight draping the distant mountains. He pressed a palm against the cool stone sill. Must he forever chase threats? Would the realm, or the wider world, never be free of new terrors? He sensed rather than saw the presence of the red priest behind him. The man moved quietly, the hem of his robe whispering over the floor. John turned, expression guarded. Lord Snow, the priest began softly, inclining his head. I do not wish to disturb your peace, but you were the one who ended the long night. Some call you the prince that was promised. My order in Volantis believes that promise extends beyond one war. John met his eyes. Why come to me here? Why not speak to King Bran or the great lords? The priest studied him. We believe the flames chose you, not a throne. In the war for the dawn, a king was not the one to bring deliverance, but you who united men. You whose sword was tempered by death and sacrifice. The red priests in Volantis have had visions, a sword shining pale in the darkness, a man who once lay dead now walking among the living. They see you in their flames. John suppressed a grimace. The conversation reminded him too keenly of Melisandre's fervor. Melisandre made mistakes about the prophecy, he said. She believed in Stannis. Then she believed in me. The truth was more complicated. The priest nodded. Prophecy is rarely simple. We are not infallible. But we do not doubt that you carry a spark of the Lord of Light's power in your blood. Rhaegar Targaryen's line was said to be touched by fire, the Starks by ice. You are the living union. John turned back to the moonlit mountains. If a threat arises in Essos, that might be a matter for Essos to handle. Westeros bled in the last war. We need peace. A gentle sigh escaped the priest's lips. I understand. Still, should the day come that darkness spreads across the sea again, will you answer the call? The Lord of Light does not demand worship, but he may beckon you to fulfill your destiny. John closed his eyes briefly. I can't speak for the future. But if innocent lives are threatened, I'll stand for them as I always have. He faced the priest. That is all I can promise. The priest bowed, accepting this. Thank you. May the light protect you, Azor Ahai reborn. Then he slipped away, leaving John alone in the corridor. After a moment, Ghost padded up, pressing his muzzle against John's leg in quiet companionship. John stroked the wolf's head, feeling a swirl of emotions, regret, resolve, weariness. Was this to be his endless cycle, fighting darkness wherever it rose? Part of him whispered that he might never truly know peace, that the sword at his side was more than steel. It was a bond linking him to all the realm's unanswered horrors. By the following morning, John had resolved to return north. He bade Lord Royce farewell, advising him to remain vigilant for any further bandit resurgence. Royce, grateful, pledged to keep the Vale secure. John avoided the red priests who had camped outside the castle gates, preferring not to prolong their conversation about prophecies. He had no desire to sail off to Essos on a fool's crusade, especially when King Bran still relied on him here. Accompanied by his retinue, he began the slow descent from the gates of the moon. The morning air was crisp, the sky brushed with streaks of white cloud. As they passed the bloody gate, John cast a final glance at the fortress perched between cliffs, remembering how he once traveled this road with Sansa as she fled King's Landing's intrigues. How the world had changed since then. Their journey back across the mountains was uneventful. In the foothills, they encountered wandering shepherds and small caravans. Some recognized John and hailed him, grateful that bandits were no longer a menace. Onward they rode, forging a path toward the main roads that would lead back to Winterfell. Yet with every step, John felt an undercurrent of restlessness, as if the seeds of a new tribulation had been planted by the Red Priest's warning. He tried to dismiss it, focusing on the immediate tasks, ensuring the North remained stable, continuing to mediate disputes among the lords if needed. One afternoon, they stopped at an inn near a fork in the road. The sign above the door swung in a gentle breeze, depicting a mountain and a falcon in peeling paint. Inside, the common room smelled of stew, ale, and wood smoke. John's company took a corner table. Farmers and travelers occupied the other tables, some glancing at John with curiosity. He was used to such stares, rumors often preceded him. They ordered a midday meal, trying to shake off the chill. Ghost settled beneath the table, his presence causing the innkeeper some anxiety, though no one dared to object. As John sipped ale, he overheard snatches of conversation from a nearby table. Two rough-looking traders spoke in conspiratorial tones. Heard from a caravan that the Golden Company is stirring in the disputed lands, licking their wounds after the war here. They might sail west again, or so they say. The throne is still not secure. King or not, the boy on the throne can't control the seas. If themselves-words get a new backer, we might see another invasion. The talk trailed off as they noticed John's gaze. He pretended disinterest and turned back to his meal. But the words stirred old anxieties. The Golden Company had once served Aegon False Targaryen in a convoluted conflict, then later fought for Cersei Lannister. Now, with no clear champion in Westeros, they might bide their time, waiting for an opportunity. The realm felt more fragile than ever, as if any shift in the wind could bring fresh war. Jon finished his stew, trying to keep his expression neutral. Ever since the death of Daenerys, the Seven Kingdoms had no single powerful unifier besides the intangible presence of King Bran, whose governance was often distant. A pang of guilt twined with his frustration. Daenerys had wanted to break the wheel, but her methods had become too ruthless, leading him to that final, terrible act. Now the wheels of old power structures kept turning, each faction looking for advantage. They resumed their travels shortly after. Over the next week, they encountered a few more caravans, heard occasional references to tensions at sea or rumors from across the narrow sea, but nothing concrete. At last, they passed through the Wolfswood, the towering trees a comforting sight, leading them to Winterfell's gates once more. Dusk was falling, the sky tinted purple. Torches flared along the walls. Sansa welcomed him in the courtyard, relief evident in her face when she saw no serious injuries among his group. She ushered him inside, quickly inquiring about the Vale. He told her of the bandits' defeat, the Red Priest's ominous tidings. She listened with a furrowed brow. "I suppose we should let Bran know," she said. "Even if it comes to nothing, he should be aware that Essos might be unsettled." Jon nodded, removing his gloves. "He likely already knows in his way. But yes, we'll send a raven." She studied him, catching the tension in his eyes. "What do you think? Is it a real threat?" He paused. "I don't know. Essos has always been in flux, city-states warring, slave revolts, and so on. Daenerys left a power vacuum. If warlords are rising, it might stay contained there. But he couldn't entirely banish the sense of foreboding. Or it might spill into Westeros, if someone seeks to exploit the aftermath here." Sansa let out a quiet sigh. "Then we'd have yet another conflict. The people can't endure another cataclysm, Jon." He gently squeezed her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. "We'll handle what comes. For now, the immediate trouble in the Vale is resolved." She nodded, though her eyes remained clouded with worry. "Very well. Rest for now. You look exhausted." He took her advice, retreating to his quarters. But rest was fleeting, his thoughts circled. Some nights, he dreamt of a great black ocean surging against the shores of Westeros, with monstrous shapes writhing beneath the waves. Other nights, he dreamt of the Iron Throne, still molten from dragonfire, with ghosts of the past drifting in its ruins. In some dreams, Daenerys stood with her back to him, her silver hair whipped by phantom winds, and no matter how he tried to call her name, she never turned. Days slid into weeks. Jon busied himself with small tasks around Winterfell, helping reorganize the guard rotations, consulting with the steward about supply lines for the next winter, and speaking with local lords who visited. He spent time with Sansa, discussing the realm's concerns, occasionally writing letters to King Bran's court in King's Landing. Ghost often roamed the courtyard, drawing fascinated stares. For a brief period, life felt almost normal, or as close to normal as it could for Jon Snow. Then a raven arrived from the south. It bore the sigil of House Tarly, Samwell's house, though Sam himself was at the Citadel in Old Town. The message was penned by Sam's hand, terse and urgent. "Jon, I write with troubling news. I have been reviewing old Valyrian texts here at the Citadel, seeking insight into the aftermath of Daenerys's conquest of Slavers Bay. Rumors from sailors and merchants speak of a new warlord in Meereen claiming the legacy of House Targaryen. Some say he has found a way to hatch new dragons using old lore. This could be fancy or rumor, but if there is any truth, it may pose a threat to the stability of Essos and possibly beyond. The Archmasters are divided on what to believe, but I trust your judgment. Please advise if you've heard anything similar. I will continue my research. Yours in friendship, Sam." Jon felt his chest tighten as he read the letter. The mention of new dragons cut deeper than any rumor of warlords or sellswords. Could it be possible? Daenerys had hatched dragons once in a miraculous event, forging them in blood and fire. That knowledge had seemed lost or perhaps unique to her lineage. And yet, if someone else had discovered a method. He took the letter to Sansa, letting her read it in silence. She looked up, worry etched on her face. If more dragons emerge, that changes everything. Ships traveling from Volantis or Myrine to Westeros could bring war right to our doorstep. Jon murmured a reply. Or it might be a false rumor. Men often claim Targaryen blood for prestige. But Sam seldom writes in such a tone unless he believes there's real cause. Sansa's jaw tightened. Bran should know. And we should gather information from Bravos and Pentos, maybe from the merchants in White Harbor who trade across the narrow sea. I'll handle it, Jon said quietly. I'll go to White Harbor, speak with the sea captains there. If we need more intelligence, I can sail to Bravos. She looked taken aback. That's a long journey, Jon. Are you certain? He set the letter down. I'm certain we need answers. If there's any possibility that new dragons have been hatched, the realm must prepare. A twinge of memory surfaced, Daenerys's dragons raining fire over the long night, saving them all, then destroying King's Landing. The double-edged nature of dragons was not lost on him. Sansa nodded slowly, though reluctance shadowed her features. Very well. I can manage the north in your absence. But be cautious. We can't afford to lose you, Jon. He touched her arm, wishing to reassure. I'll be back once I know more. He paused. We should also send word to King Bran. He may see more than we do. She agreed, and they penned a raven detailing Sam's letter and the rumors from the Vale. Then Jon prepared to leave once more, gathering a small company, among them a trusted northern knight, a couple of free folk he knew well, and a few men who served as scouts. Ghost would accompany him as always. They stocked supplies for a journey to White Harbor, which lay southeast of Winterfell along the White Knife River. As they departed Winterfell's gates, Jon looked back, a pang of regret tugging at him. He had only just returned from the Vale, and already he was leaving Sansa to shoulder the burdens of rule alone. But time fell short. If Sam's rumors proved true, the realm needed the truth quickly. He urged his horse onward, Ghost loping alongside, the small party taking the main road that cut through the wide, rolling plains south of Winterfell. The journey to White Harbor took over a week. Spring had softened the roads, turning patches muddy, but the days were mild. They camped under starry skies, sometimes passing caravans and farmers. At night, Jon wrestled with restless dreams again, visions of dragons swirling overhead, accompanied by a voice he couldn't quite place. It was neither Daenerys nor Rhaegar, but it whispered, "Fire is reborn." He woke each time with a racing pulse, wondering if it was an omen or merely an echo of old trauma. When they finally reached White Harbor's outskirts, the bustling port city came into view, the walls of pale stone reflecting sunlight, tall watchtowers overlooking a harbor dotted with sails. Merchant vessels glided into the harbor, their pennants snapping in the breeze. The Manderleys had long been loyal to the Starks, and the city's gates opened for Jon without hesitation. Lord Wyman Manderley had passed away the previous year, leaving governance to his heir, Ser Marlon Manderley, a stocky man with a penchant for fish pies and lavish celebrations, though not quite as grandiose as his father. He greeted Jon warmly in the reception hall of the new castle, White Harbor's keep within the city walls. "Jon Snow," Marlon said with genuine pleasure. "Or should I say King in the North? Or Lord Commander? You wear many titles." He grinned. "My father always spoke fondly of you." Rest his soul, he'd have demanded a feast at once. Jon offered a polite smile. "I'll gladly share a meal, but I come on urgent business. I need to speak with any captains who've recently returned from across the narrow sea. Rumors speak of unrest in Myrine, perhaps new dragons." Manderley's bushy eyebrows rose. "That's quite a rumor. I have a few captains in port now, men who trade in Bravos, Pentos, and even Volantis. I'll send for them." And so, in a private chamber overlooking the harbor, Jon met with a half-dozen sea captains and merchants, each with stories to tell. They drank spiced wine and spoke of uncertain politics across the sea, warlords in the remnants of Ahai, and scrupulous sells-word companies roaming the Red Waste, the old conflict between the Volantene triarchs and the newly freed cities. But only one captain, a weathered woman named Sherry's of the Summer Isles, spoke convincingly of dragons. "I saw something in the skies near Astapor," she said, voice tense. "A shape that flew at dusk, larger than any bird. The locals called it a dragon," said a warlord from the east had conjured it. "Could be fable, but I saw the silhouette myself." Jon listened intently, pressing for more details. She admitted she only glimpsed it once, at a distance. Astapor had changed hands multiple times since Daenerys first freed it. The city was a ruin in many quarters. Sherry's believed if a new dragon existed, it was tied to someone claiming Targaryen descent. She'd heard whispers of a man styling himself Daemon Targaryen, though she never laid eyes on him. Some said he was a mummer's dragon, a pretender, others insisted he bore Valyrian features. Jon thanked her, though disquiet churned in his gut. One sighting didn't confirm a living dragon, but it added weight to Sam's letter. Another captain mentioned seeing new mercenaries funneling into Meereen as if preparing for a larger conflict. All of it painted a picture of growing turmoil. After the captains departed, John stood on the balcony with Marlon Manderley gazing out at the harbor lights flickering against the evening sky. The tang of salt air filled his lungs. Manderley shook his head. Dragons, again? After the last war, I thought we'd seen the end of them. John gazed at his hands. Daenerys's 2 surviving dragons vanished after her death. Drogon carried her body east. Rhaegal died in battle. Some claim Drogon was seen in Volantis, others say he vanished into shadow. Could it be the same dragon? Or a newly hatched one? Manderley exhaled. Hard to say. If this Demian truly has a dragon, he could rally armies in Essos. But crossing the narrow sea to invade us would be no small task. True, John allowed. But if his ambition grows, Westeros might appear ripe for conquest. Our king is not the warrior king type. We're still recovering. It wouldn't be the first time a Targaryen soared over the seas with a dragon. A hush stretched between them. Finally, Manderley mustered a wry grin. Well, if they do come, you've bested a Targaryen with dragons once before. Though I don't envy you that memory. John closed his eyes briefly. Nor do I. Manderley excused himself, promising to arrange comfortable quarters for John and his men and to gather any further news from incoming ships. As night deepened, John found himself unable to rest, pacing the balcony. The flicker of torches on the quay, the clink of anchor chains, he realized how the sea could be both a bridge and a barrier. Across the dark water lay the possibility of another war. For so long he grappled with the White Walkers, then with Daenerys's tragic downfall. Was he now fated to confront a new Targaryen pretender with a dragon? He drew Lightbringer partly from its scabbard, observing the pale glow along the edge. The sword seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat as if responding to his mounting tension. If it was truly bound to him by prophecy, then perhaps it sensed that conflict loomed again. Yet the notion exhausted him. Would he ever be free of prophecy's grip? Ghost whined softly behind him as though in sympathy. John ruffled the direwolf's ears. It seems we have more trials ahead, boy, he murmured. In times like these, he dearly missed the simpler companionship of his siblings. Arya was far off on her journeys. Bran was the king, remote and inscrutable. Rickon was gone, lost in the war. Sansa was in Winterfell carrying the burden of leadership. And the one woman John had loved, Daenerys, was gone by his own hand. He told himself that if new dragons truly threatened the peace, he would do whatever must be done to protect the realm. But a part of him balked at the thought of slaying another Targaryen, another dragon, repeating the tragedy. He prayed it wouldn't come to that. Over the next few days, he spoke with additional merchants and sailors, gleaning bits of contradictory gossip. Some insisted the stories of dragons were exaggerations. Others claimed multiple eggs had hatched. He penned letters to Sam in Old Town, sharing what he learned, urging Sam to investigate further. He also wrote to Sansa, updating her. No word had yet arrived from King Bran, though ravens sometimes took weeks to travel and secure replies. One morning, as he stood at the docks to inspect a newly arrived ship, he was approached by a sail captain from Lys, a thin man with a scar across his cheek. The man introduced himself as Galad Andoris. He said he'd heard John was seeking news of dragons, so he had something to share, albeit for a price. John raised an eyebrow but listened. Galad revealed that he had ferried a group of red priests from Volantis to Lys weeks prior. They spoke openly of a champion rising in Meereen, a dragon-blooded warrior who could threaten the Great Other. John bristled at the mention of the Great Other, that name Melisandre once used for the White Walkers. Yet he forced calm, pressing for details. Galad shrugged. I only caught fragments, but they said this champion was the chosen scion of House Targaryen and heir to the Mother of Dragons. They believed he would either bring salvation or destruction. The priests in Volantis were divided. Some said he was Azor Ahai's ally, others claimed he was a pretender who must be destroyed. John cursed under his breath. Another layer of red priest prophecy, now painting this Demian Targaryen, if that was his name, as either a savior or a threat. Did they say anything about the sword or the realm to the west? Galad shook his head. Only that the true Azor Ahai was in Westeros, the man who ended the long night. I put 2 and 2 together when I heard rumors about you, Lord Snow. John grit his teeth. It seemed the red priests of R'hllor were spinning another cosmic battle, this time between him and some new dragon claimant. The thought churned his stomach. Thank you, he told Galad, handing over a small pouch of silver to compensate him. If you learn more, contact me here at White Harbor. The Celsail nodded eagerly, pocketing the coin. John watched him depart along the dock, then gazed across the sea with a heavy sense of foreboding. Could it be that this was bigger than a mere warlord's ambition? Perhaps the priests believed a confrontation was inevitable. Azor Ahai in Westeros versus a dragon-blooded upstart in Essos. He wondered which side the priests would favor, or if they'd simply watch from the sidelines, fueling both sides with their prophecies. That afternoon, John returned to the new castle, intent on writing yet another letter to Sansa about this new insight. As he passed through the courtyard, he noticed a commotion near the gates. Shouts and scuffling. Ghost pricked his ears, trotting ahead. John followed, discovering that Manderley's guards had detained a man with ragged clothing, who seemed half-starved and frantic, brandishing a dagger. The guards had him pinned to a wall. He shouted incoherently until he caught sight of John, then started screaming, "The sword! The sword of Ghost Flame! He's the one! I saw you in my dreams!" John blinked, scanning the man's face. He was young, with a tangled beard, eyes wild with desperation. "Let him speak," John commanded softly. The guard stepped back, though remained poised to seize him if he tried anything foolish. The man panted, turning on John with a fervor in his gaze. You have the sword that glows like the moon," he gasped. I heard you can save us from the dragon across the sea. Please, my family is—" He broke off, voice cracking. John approached with caution. "Calm yourself. Who are you?" The man gulped. "My name's Dorn, from a village near the coast. I have a sister and her children in Tyrosh. She wrote that they're terrified. There's talk of a dragon lord marching from Meereen, enslaving towns that resist him. She said his men have banners with a three-headed dragon, red on black, but twisted with some new symbol. She fled, begged me to help. But I can't. I'm just a fisherman. I heard rumors that Jon Snow, the man who killed the Dragon Queen, had a sword of ghostlight, that you could stand against any dragon. Please, you have to stop him." A wave of pity swept through John. The poor fisherman was desperate, believing in half-formed rumors. "Take him inside," he told the guards. "Give him food, a place to rest." To Dorn, he said gently, "We'll try to learn more. But I can't sail off to Essos on a whim, not without help or proof." Dorn nodded vigorously, tears gathering in his eyes. "Thank you, Lord. Gods bless you. The realm needs you. The whole world needs you." The last words struck John like a hammer. The man's fervent plea echoed the Red Priest's warning that the struggle might not be done. John let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his forehead. More and more, the signs pointed to an impending crisis across the narrow sea. People were fleeing or crying out for a savior, placing their faith in rumor and prophecy. It was an all-too-familiar pattern, one that made John's heart sink. He spent that night pacing his chamber, replaying what he'd learned. If Daemon Targaryen truly commanded a dragon or was in the process of hatching more, it could upend the fragile peace in Essos. And if he consolidated power, Westeros would be the next logical target for conquest. Even if Daemon was a mere pretender, the chaos could spill over. Refugees might flood the ports. Tensions could erupt. War could ignite. Should Jon sail east to investigate, possibly to reason with or confront this would-be dragonlord? The thought felt daunting. He was no traveler of seas, no diplomat of Essos. Yet who else would do it? Bran was enthroned in King's Landing, seldom intervening directly. The lords of Westeros had little appetite to dispatch armies across the sea for a rumor. Even if they believed it, rallying them would take time and resources. In that interim, an entire continent could burn. Jon stared at Lightbringer, unsheathed on the table, its faint glow casting shifting shadows on the walls. He thought of Daenerys again, her impossible hatching of dragon eggs, the way she had once wanted to free Essos from slavery before turning her eyes to Westeros. And now, ironically, another Targaryen might be reversing that path, rising in Essos to threaten the West. Felt like a dreadful cycle, repeating old patterns. At last, he made a decision. He would gather more intelligence at Bravos or Pentos, see for himself if these rumors held substance. If indeed a Targaryen warlord existed, commanding dragons, perhaps Jon could negotiate, warn him off. Or, if worst came to worst, stand against him with Lightbringer, though the notion made Jon's stomach churn. He did not want to kill another Targaryen, but he would not let the realm plunge into chaos again. He confided in Marlon Manderly the next day. Manderly frowned, concerned. It's a bold move, Jon. Sailing to Essos with only a handful of men could be dangerous. Why not petition King Bran for support? Jon exhaled. That would take time. The king moves slowly, consulting councils. By the time he decides, the situation might be far worse. I'll send him word, but I can't wait on his approval. Manderly nodded. I see. Then I'll help you secure a ship. The North may not have a grand fleet, but White Harbor can spare you a sturdy vessel and loyal sailors. Jon nodded gratefully. Thank you. They set about making preparations at once. News traveled fast in White Harbor that Jon Snow intended to cross the narrow sea, possibly to confront a new dragon threat. Some sailors balked. Dragons were the stuff of nightmares, but many had a deep respect for the man who once slew the Mad Queen, as rumor had it. A vessel named the Ice Drake was chosen for its reliability, fitted with fresh sails and enough provisions for a long voyage. Jon composed letters to Sansa, Sam, and King Bran explaining his intent. To Sansa, he wrote that he could not sit idle while the seeds of a new Targaryen conquest took root. He asked her forgiveness for leaving without more thorough discussion, but stressed the urgency. He asked Sam to gather as much knowledge of hatching dragons and Targaryen lore as possible and send updates, ideally to Bravos or Pentos. To Bran, he respectfully informed the king that if the rumors proved false, he would return swiftly. If they proved true, he would do what was necessary to protect the realm. The day of departure came quickly. The Ice Drake sat in its berth, sails furled, crew bustling. Jon supervised the loading of supplies, dried meats, casks of water, medicines, even some trade goods for potential negotiations in Bravos. He had no illusions about forging a mighty expedition. He would rely on stealth, diplomacy, and a small circle of loyal men and women at his side. Among those traveling with him were Jory, a young scout from the north who idolized Jon, Uller, a free folk hunter skilled with bow and blade, Corin, an older knight who had served House Manderly and wished for one more adventure, and a handful of sailors loyal to White Harbor. Ghost would accompany Jon, of course, though the direwolf disliked ships. Despite the difficulties, Jon couldn't leave his companion behind. A crowd gathered at the docks to watch them off. Some cheered, believing a new epic was unfolding, while others looked on with pity or dread. Marlon Manderly stood at the quay's edge, clasping Jon's hand. Gods be with you. The North will pray for your safe return. Jon gave a faint smile. I appreciate that. Tell Sansa, tell her I'm sorry. Manderly nodded, releasing his grip. She'll understand. Return to us when you can, Lord Snow. With that, Jon boarded the Ice Drake. The gangplank was raised, the lines cast off. Sailors climbed rigging, calling orders. The ship's sails unfurled, catching the wind. Slowly, the vessel drifted away from the dock, out into the harbor's expanse. Jon stood at the bow, watching White Harbor recede, the ramparts and towers shrinking into the distance. Ghost sat near him, ears flattened as if sensing the uncertainty ahead. Jon drew a steadying breath. Across the narrow sea lay unknown perils, perhaps a new Targaryen with dragons, or perhaps another scheme by opportunists. The Red Priest's talk of prophecy still echoed in his mind, but he tried to silence it. He was no zealot. He was just a man who had once died for the realm, who could not stand by while others risked repeating the mistakes of the past. The wind filled the sails, carrying them into deeper waters. Gulls circled overhead, crying out as if in farewell. Jon rested a hand on Lightbringer's hilt, feeling the subtle warmth. He murmured softly, half to himself, half to the memory of Daenerys, if dragons rise again, let it not be for destruction. But if it must come to that, I'll do what I must. No answer came, save the slap of waves against the hull. The ship turned southeast, aiming for Bravos. Behind Jon, the horizon stretched wide and open, beckoning him to a new chapter of conflict and hope. Some might have called him Azor, Ahai reborn, but he felt only the burden of a man trying to prevent yet another cataclysm. In that quiet departure, with the wind singing through the rigging and the ghostly glow of his sword tucked beneath his cloak, Jon Snow began the long journey east, uncertain if he would return triumphant or broken, but determined to face the darkness. Whether shaped by dragons or men, one more time.